Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku become Quirkless Teenager Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see Part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗃 from Wattpad. So let's start the video. Stupid Deku. You're seriously keeping up with your pathetic dream even when you know it's not gonna happen. You must really be an idiot. 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗃 sneered as he came closer to Izuku Midoriya, who was crawling backwards from him, eventually hitting a wall behind him. You're Quirkless Deku. You might as well get over that. As a matter of fact, I'm being a true hero right by telling you this. You're welcome. With that, he laughed with his friends as they walked away from the now crying Midoriya. No, I'll find a way to become a hero. Midoriya clenched his fists and bit his lower lip, in hope that it gave him a more confident look. I'll become the #1 hero, and you will know that you made a mistake. I won't have to look up to you anymore. Midoriya managed to let out an awkward smile as another tear came down his cheek. I'll do anything I can to prove you wrong, Kakin. He snapped, obviously to himself, and standing up wobbly. He knew it would take him a while to say it to Bakugo's face, so he simply wiped away his tears with his clenched fists and started walking towards his home, hoping that whenever the moment would come, it would come soon. I can tell by the look on your face that whatever you were just thinking about wasn't really heroic, kid. Midoriya flinched and swirled around to see a man with black spiky hair and strange-looking stitched, connecting the strangely, possibly scarred parts of his skin with his healthy skin. He was leaning against the wall of the alley beside Midoriya, making Midoriya question how none of them had seen him earlier, tensing up at the thought. Seeming to notice Midoriya's confused and shocked expression, the man straightened, letting Midoriya realize just how menacing-looking he was, even if he was still slumping and seemingly relaxed. Midoriya felt a gut-churning feeling that he was a villain, and he couldn't help but clench his fists in an unsuccessful attempt of calming himself down, the panic making his heart race. Didn't mean to scare you, kid. I was just wondering where a pal of mine could be going to school at, and stumbled upon you. He shrugged casually, and Midoriya quickly glanced around, trying his best to see if anyone else could help him if things went downhill. Despite wanting to be a hero, he wasn't completely stupid, and he knew that if the villain would attack him, he might not be able to fight back. Sorry I didn't help you. Hope to see that you can handle the situation yourself, but oh well. The man stretched his arms lazily, and Midoriya flinched unwillingly at the movement, before slowly backing away from him, hoping he wouldn't notice, which didn't work as the villain quirked an eyebrow at him, crossing his hands on his 𝗧𝗓 as he spoke. Already leaving? Come on, I just want to talk, kid. He said casually, making Midoriya tense up even more. Whatever the villain wanted from him, he knew it wasn't good, and he knew exactly what he needed to do if the person in front of him was actually a villain. And so, Midoriya started running away, fear weakening his body, making him stumble and shake as he ran, but he pushed through and continued to run anyways. In about a minute, he completely ran out of breath and started shaking uncontrollably as he fell down and leaned against a building. He saw people side-eyeing him, and slowly stood up and managed to get around the building and into an alley, where the trash from the building was, in an attempt to get out of other people's view, suddenly feeling weak and pathetic for his actions. He let his fear take over and started shaking even more. Come on, I didn't run that much, I can't be this tired. Could it be his quirk? Midoriya then slowly raised his shaking hand and watched it shake and twitch, before he clenched his hand into a fist and dropped it, trying to be mad about this whole situation. But all he felt was fear. How can I be the #1 hero if I can't even control my emotions? Midoriya made his way home and managed to smile at his mom, 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗃, who was cooking something good-smelling in the kitchen. Welcome home, Izuku. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗃 called out happily. Midoriya couldn't help but smile, a more genuine smile, as he saw his mother happily getting her mind off things by cooking. Of course, he wished he could comfort her himself, but he also knew that she didn't want him to worry about her, and so he held back, instead taking off his shoes and walking up to his mom, her cheek, before glancing at the stove. Hey mom. What's for dinner? Midoriya greeted as he smiled at the other buoyant brunette. Your favorite? 𝗵𝗃𝗀 replied cheerfully as she winked at Midoriya. Midoriya smiled and couldn't help but chuckle. Even when he was in a bad mood, and do note that his mom didn't know, she could always make him feel better. Is this some sort of mother instinct that does this? He thought to himself. Awesome. I'll do my homework first though, he replied as he quickly hugged his mom, enjoying the feeling of yearning of the hug slowly melting into the hug, and 𝗵𝗃𝗀 smiled at him soothingly, caressing his hair for a few seconds, before Midoriya pulled away and walked upstairs to his room. He heard his mom starting to hum a melody and smiled again, and kept on smiling as he made his way to his room, feeling truly happy for lightening up his mom's mood. His mom was the only thing that made him truly happy, not counting heroes and quirk analysis of course, but those were more hobbies that he enjoyed rather than something he loved. To Midoriya, his mom was his hero, and he loved her more than anything and anyone in the world. Despite the fact that she no longer has a husband, and sometimes spends her day alone at home without anyone to talk to, or anything to do, she always smiles and makes him feel better, even when he's in an already good enough mood after managing to avoid Bakugo all day. He sat down to do his homework, and was about to start reading, when something caught his eye and he stopped. He slowly moved his head and then his eyes towards the window to see the same man from the alley smirking at him from the other side of the window. Midoriya sat there, shocked, until the man started to wave at him playfully. Midoriya was stumped. I'm probably just hallucinating, he walked up to his window. The man raised an eyebrow as Midoriya stared at him for another good seconds, before finally closing the curtains. I'm not dealing with this today. I'm tired. I'll just go do my homework like any other kid my age, and he turned around to see the man sitting in his chair studying his hero analysis for the future notebooks. Midoriya couldn't help but let out a shriek, causing the man to look up at him. What's that face for? I don't like being ignored, so I had to get a friend of mine get me here. Midoriya stood there, stumped, not knowing what to do. His mind raced on what he could do, and he reached for the extra pillow inside his open closet, and threw it at the man in a weak attempt to be able to run away. Right as he jumped towards the door, watching 𝗬𝗍 in fear, the man simply put out his hand, and the pillow was turned to ash in a matter of a second. Midoriya stood there for another few seconds, and Midoriya stumbled in shock as 𝗬𝗍𝗄's eyes quickly darted towards Midoriya. Midoriya stopped, a few steps from the door, and gulped down the knot in his throat. Yeah, I know, seeing such a handsome face in your room is pretty overwhelming. This isn't the first time I'm having a pillow thrown at me after appearing in their room. The man poked his cheeks and moved them, causing it to look like he was smiling. Midoriya just blinked, not sure what was going on. The man opened one of his eyes to see Midoriya's reaction, seeing nothing but a boy with a slightly agape mouth and a stumped expression. He sighed and let out a small chuckle, closing his notebook as Midoriya finally gathered the courage to speak, frowning at the villain as he tried to keep himself from screaming in terror. Are you a villain? What do you want from me? Midoriya stood into what was close to a fighting stance he saw heroes did. The man let out another sigh as he focused back on the hero analysis notebooks. You trying to overwhelm me with questions or something? I'm a guest, be polite for whatever God's sake. He mumbled lazily as he opened the notebook again and flipped through the pages, narrowing his eyes as he scanned the pages. Midoriya continued to stand in the fighting stance, but didn't dare attack, the longing to be burnt to death enough for him to give up on the idea of running out the door. And besides, he couldn't put Mom in danger. He would never forget himself if he did that, and so, he had to keep the villain in this room and pray that 𝗵𝗃𝗀 wouldn't come into his room. Suddenly, the man then closed the notebook and stood up from his chair. Midoriya stepped back. Is he going to attack me? What do I do? If he tries to attack me with his quirk, he'll probably manage to land an attack at 𝗵𝗃𝗀 first, because he's the one that's preparing to attack, and, you're mumbling. A habit. The man noted, raising an amused eyebrow at Midoriya. Midoriya was about to apologize, but stopped just in time, remembering that this man was the one that broke into his house. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 sighed as he sat up on the bed and placed one of his arm onto his knee, placing his hand on his hand. I came to talk to you about something. My name's 𝗬𝗍𝗄. He reached out his hand, causing Midoriya to jump back, almost tripping by his own feet. His room wasn't big, especially not wide, so his chances on escaping were very slim. Knowing that 𝗬𝗲𝗍's quirk was a fire-based one, and most likely long-ranged, he wouldn't make it far if 𝗬𝗲 didn't want him to. 𝗬𝗲 smirked at Midoriya's nervous and pondering reaction, seeming to realize what Midoriya was thinking. "I didn't come here to hurt you, kid." "Well, that's unless you try to do something stupid," he hinted, glancing at the door. Midoriya slowly nodded, doing his best to come up with a plan while he stood on the same spot, so close yet so far away from the door. "What do you want then?" Midoriya snapped as angrily as he could. His attempt wasn't half-hearted, but his expression was more of a terrified puppy on the streets rather than the whole he tried to appear to be. 𝗬𝗲 smirked at him again, a teasing look on his face at the pity attempt. "The answer's simple. I just saw a kid who was in trouble and wanted to talk about the SHT in your life. I may be a villain, but I'm not a monster who ignores people in need. Besides, I was one as well, so I guess, as Toga calls me, I'm quite a softie when it comes to this." 𝗬𝗲 shrugged as he fell back on Midoriya's bed, muttering something about the bed being pretty soft as Midoriya gaped at him in disbelief. "You know, I'm not that younger than you," Midoriya snapped, trying his best to ignore the remark about his shitty life. It's not the fact that he was being called a kid that him off, for that matter, he wasn't really at all, but he wanted to prove that he wasn't a weakling, especially to someone so dangerous looking. And besides, the last thing he wanted was to start spilling all his life to the stranger that broke into his room. He mumbled as he saw 𝗬𝗲 sit up with a confused look. "You look younger than you are, kiddo," 𝗬𝗲 stated, a hint of teasing in his voice as he ignored Midoriya's remark. "So, mind explaining who Blondie was? Why do you care so much?" Midoriya snapped, not liking how caring the villain was to him, looking as creepy and menacing as he was. And it was Deku he was talking about. If he found out that Midoriya didn't have a quirk, maybe 𝗬𝗲 wouldn't have even bothered breaking into the house and speaking to him. You know, I'm against kids being kicked, and it seems like he was doing just that, even if not entirely literally. Although, I suppose it happened literally as well. Midoriya glowered and looked away, his hands crossed on his 𝗧𝗍𝗃. "That doesn't matter. You can leave now." "Nah, I haven't talked to others much before. I need more socializing, especially with people with more sanity than those surrounding me at the moment," 𝗬𝗲 said, mumbling the last part. "Well, you can go talk with insane pals. I'm busy. I need to do homework." Midoriya tried to excuse, casually walking up to the desk as he searched for any possible weapon he could at least knock 𝗬𝗲 out with. "I can help with that. Or, the other way around, actually I kinda missed out on school by a couple years." He then walked towards Midoriya, who was about to scream, and yanked him towards the chair, which was a few remaining steps away. Midoriya yelped and fell into the chair, and 𝗬𝗲 pushed him towards Midoriya's desk, leaning onto his chair, looking at the homework pages in front of them. "Come on, I want to know stuff. I know I'm bad at math, but that's all that I remember from my lessons. Can't even remember why I was bad at math." Midoriya gulped and let out a shaky breath before slowly taking his papers and starting to work. 𝗬𝗲 watched him, reading what he wrote and sometimes asking him what things meant. Midoriya tried to keep cool, but whenever 𝗬𝗲 started talking, he remembered just how close he was and trembled at the thought that the villain could easily turn him to ashes. That's what the scars on his skin could be, right? Midoriya felt it was safe to assume that it was a side effect of his quirk, and he couldn't help but feel proud at being able to get at least a little bit of information about the villain. He needed as much information as he could about him if he wanted to find a way to get rid of the pestering villain. "Izuku, are you done yet? The katsudon is ready." Inko's voice rang out from downstairs. 𝗬𝗲 let out a sigh and stepped back from the chair. As Midoriya stood up quickly, he realized that he was sweating and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He then glanced at 𝗬𝗲 and ran towards the door, opening it and shutting it loudly behind him. "Izuku, are you alright?" Inko called out again. "Yeah. Sorry, Mom, I just opened the window and it's kinda windy." Midoriya called out, glancing back as he walked towards the kitchen. He couldn't help but pray that when he comes back, the villain would disappear, and that would be the end of it. Little did he know, it was only the beginning of their story. Midoriya didn't see 𝗬𝗲 for a week. He thought he would feel relief at being freed from the villain, but as more time passed, he found himself walking through the alley even more often than he did, this time not for a shortcut, but because of a subconscious purpose. And Midoriya hated it. 𝗬𝗲 could burn him the moment he sees him, and as much as Midoriya hated admitting it, he would be dead the second 𝗬𝗲 wanted to kill him. And yet, he couldn't help but keep thinking about the way 𝗬𝗲 looked at him as he spoke, a glint of seriousness in his eyes as he watched Midoriya back in his room. I just saw a kid who was in trouble and wanted to talk about the 𝗧𝗃𝗃 in your life. Besides, I was one as well. 𝗬𝗲 was one as well. That could only mean one thing, and Midoriya couldn't help but feel sad and curious about the villain, his vague words enough to have Midoriya on the hook and wanting more. And, oh God, he wished that his longing for knowledge would calm down for once, because walking through the alley again after school, he realized just how stupid it was of him to listen to his heart and look for 𝗬𝗲 again. Bakugo was standing there with his two pals, leaning against the wall of the building as he glared at them, the other two chatting without care as they leaned against the wall as well. Midoriya visibly gulped and turned away, ready to run for it, but suddenly, his collar suddenly got pulled from behind. Midoriya let out a yelp, Bakugo dragging him back into the alley and slamming him against the wall. His head was used to this, but it still hurt, and so he hissed in pain as he slowly reached for his head. "And what exactly are you doing here every day, huh, Deku?" he asked intimidatingly, and Midoriya shivered slightly. "Well, I just like going this way," Midoriya stuttered. Bakugo snickered at his fear as then suddenly reached out and let out an explosion to his face. It wasn't at max, but it still burned and hurt, and Midoriya couldn't help but wonder if he left a mark as he reached for his face, wincing at the light touch. "You're right. Or do you just like being beat up? This place brings back good memories, or some of you seems like you enjoyed being yelled at and burnt, don't you?" Bakugo snapped, before grabbing Midoriya by the collar again, forcing him to stand up so that Bakugo wouldn't tear it like he did all those times. Just as he was going to explode Midoriya in the shoulder he was already gripping at again, they heard a thump next to them. The four looked towards where they heard the thump, only to see a spiky-haired man, wearing a torn dark blue leather jacket and the same colored lazily standing up. Midoriya's eyes widened in realization at the familiar figure, and he couldn't hold back a small gasp that was unheard of by the other three of his classmates. "I don't think he enjoyed it, Katsuki Bakugo," 𝗬𝗲 growled, a de-stained look on his face as he narrowed his eyes at the startled blonde. "And who's this? Is that your boyfriend or something?" "Gay Deku, now that's even more interesting." Katsuki sneered as he turned back towards Midoriya. Midoriya then couldn't help but get mad, but he didn't move as he glanced at the hand on his shoulder, smoking dangerously as it already slowly started to burn through Midoriya's uniform. "Nah, I'm too old for that. But not too old to beat your if that's what you're asking for," 𝗬𝗲 scoffed as he straightened, a small smirk appearing on his lips as he looked at Bakugo expectantly, before actually gesturing with his index finger for him to come at him. Midoriya had seen Bakugo mad before, but this sort of anger was completely on another level. Midoriya shot a worried glance at 𝗬𝗲, then frowned as he remembered who 𝗬𝗲 was. A criminal. One that broke into his house, stalked him, one with a powerful quirk and a look conveying a message that he could kill him any second if he wanted to, and yet, Midoriya trusted him with saving him from his bully. "I just saw a kid who was in trouble and wanted to talk about the 𝗧𝗃𝗃 in your life. Besides, I was one as well. Don't please," Midoriya whispered, barely audible enough for them all to hear. Bakugo glanced at him, off, before smirking again. "I almost feel sorry for you. You don't even understand how pitiful Deku's existence is." Bakugo once again focused his attention onto Midoriya from 𝗬𝗲, a smirk on his face as his eyes held a dangerous glint as he spoke again. "Maybe you should take a swan dive off the roof, and pray for a quirk in your next life." Midoriya could have sworn he felt his heart stop for a second, and he watched in disbelief as Bakugo turned back towards 𝗬𝗲, who was wearing the same seemingly annoyed expression, seeming not as surprised by the words as Midoriya was. Because, even if Bakugo had threatened him and hurt him, he had never told him to "Kaken, why did you please, don't do this?" Midoriya suddenly said, louder than previously, as realization dawned on him, causing his stomach to churn dangerously. If the glycerin on Kaken's hands gets close to 𝗬𝗲's fire, then there's going to be a massive explosion. Midoriya felt himself start to panic as Bakugo swirled around, an annoyed scowl on his face. "Shut up, Deku. You have a person standing up for you, and now, You're trying to be a good guy and break a fight that started cause of you. You idiot. Suddenly, he punched Midoriya in the nose, and Midoriya fell back on his bottom, cupping his bleeding nose in pain. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 growled, and before Bakugo could react, jumped at him and kicked him with his knee to the bottom of his jaw, causing Bakugo's face to shoot upward from the impact. Bakugo gasped as he held his jaw, spitting 𝗵𝗃𝗍𝗂. Before he could finish, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 punched him in the face, causing him to fall back and hit his head. Midoriya stood in fear as he saw unconscious Bakugo laying on the floor. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 fine, right? Midoriya kneeled down to check on Bakugo's jaw. Meanwhile, the two boys who were with Bakugo broke into a run towards the school, calling for help. Midoriya gritted his teeth as he between looking at Bakugo to looking at Bakugo's friends who were now going to tell the teachers what happened. I'm gonna be in so much trouble after this, come here. The teachers will take care of him. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 snapped as he grabbed Midoriya, sprinting and pulling Midoriya after him. Midoriya stumbled and started to break out of his grip, but 𝗬𝗲𝗍 turned a corner and covered Midoriya's mouth with his hand harshly, and Midoriya tried to get his hand off of him and tried to kick him. Calm down, let me explain. I don't want you to suffocate. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 hissed at him, gripping harder onto Midoriya's face. Midoriya couldn't hear him as he tried to scream one again, his scream muffled by 𝗬𝗲𝗍's hand. Think. What would a hero do if they start to get suffocated? Midoriya panicked as he let his nails dig deeper into 𝗬𝗲𝗍's skin. What would they do? Midoriya slowly stopped to resist as he tried to catch his breath. They would fight back, using their strength and quirk. They would fight back because they're powerful and worthy. They would fight back because they weren't 𝗬𝗍𝗂, like I am. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 watched Midoriya stop protesting, deflating, a tired and somewhat hurt look on his face, almost gone unnoticed by 𝗬𝗲𝗍 by how Midoriya's brows furrowed in annoyance and anger instead. His eyes looked sad though, something 𝗬𝗲𝗍 could see better than anyone else. He had seen them a lot of times before, even if they weren't the same. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 wasn't sure how to react. It didn't look like the pained expression he caught a glimpse of was simply caused by 𝗬𝗲𝗍 pinning him threateningly, either way, not directly. It was something much deeper, and yet, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 didn't understand why. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 slowly released Midoriya's mouth and Midoriya started to gasp, trying to regain his composure. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 waited for him to catch his breath. Sorry. Had to do that so you wouldn't scream, he muttered quietly, biting the inside of his cheek. Midoriya looked up and looked at 𝗬𝗲𝗍. Why did you drag me away like that? Midoriya whispered quietly. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 felt a little stab of guilt for having to scare someone who seemed to start to trust him. You know why? Midoriya frowned, seeming to realize at what 𝗬𝗲𝗍 was hinting at, but still snapped at him nonetheless. What do you mean? I would have been fine, Kakin is out cold. He muttered, not really liking how protective 𝗬𝗲𝗍 was being of him, as much as he was grateful for the help, but still. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 sighed. Midoriya knew exactly what he meant, but he wasn't going to let go of this so easily. You know that's not what it was about. I can't keep you out of school tomorrow from Bakugo, but I could at least prevent you from the judgment that was going to come to whomever the other guys were about to call. Not like they wouldn't blame you if I just left you there with them, whether you were the one that knocked Bakugo out or not. Midoriya let out a tired sigh, understanding exactly what 𝗬𝗲𝗍 meant and what was to come. Yeah, Kakin's never going to forgive me after this, he said aloud. They stood there in silence for what seemed like an eternity, before there was a vibration and a ring from 𝗬𝗲𝗍's phone. He took out his phone awkwardly, sighed glancing at Midoriya who was starting to mumble something. He clicked on the text without thinking and started to read, Hey Dabs. What you doing? 𝗬𝗲𝗍 rolled his eyes. It took less than a second for him to figure out who this was. 𝗳𝗏𝗵𝗃𝗲 was his friend ever since he started living a villainous life. He caught her drinking another teenager girl's BLD, and since then, they just stuck together. He stuffed down a laugh as he remembered how she immediately began examining his brunt scars without worrying what 𝗬𝗲𝗍 had just witnessed. After they became good friends and he asked her about it, she replied with a simple, I just felt you were a villain, and I knew that you wouldn't let me take your BLD if we weren't to be friends, or something like that. Obviously he never gave her any BLD, but the friendship part somehow remained. 𝗬𝗲𝗍, why don't I even have to read from whom the message is from for me to know that it's you 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏? 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏, took you a while to answer. You should train your fingers more instead of your quirk and other muscles. Midoriya heard 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 let out a 𝗧𝗬𝗧𝗟 as he stared at his phone with annoyed, yet somehow also happy look. Midoriya then suddenly realized that he was putting aside the whole importance of the situation to text someone else and felt like either smacking 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍's head against the wall, which seemed like a strong job, or his. He let his head bang back against the wall, shutting his eyes as he held back a groan of pain and annoyance. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 paid no mind as he continued texting. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍, whatever 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗧𝗏. What do you need? 𝗬𝗃𝗲, I'm waiting for you to ask me to help you 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍. What? 𝗬𝗃𝗲, you're not just gonna let that boy run away, right? 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 then let out a long and loud sigh, almost close to a groan, making Midoriya raise an eyebrow. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍, where are you? 𝗬𝗃𝗲, look up happy face carrot. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 turned around and put his phone up in the air as if trying to catch a signal. As he did that, he scanned the rooftop to see a girl with messy buns sitting on the edge of the rooftop, 𝗬𝗍𝗍𝗍 her feet like a child on a swing. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍, screw you 𝗬𝗃𝗲, manage to mind your language with a child. 𝗬𝗃𝗲, how appropriate of you 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍. Yeah, I need help here, though this guy here won't like it 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍. Don't hurt him too much. He let out a sigh as he turned back to Midoriya. He saw him rubbing the back of his head while glaring at 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 with annoyance, and 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 smirked while a snort escaped him at the reaction. He was about to let a teasing comment slip out of his mouth when there was a thump from behind, and in a matter of a second, 𝗬𝗃𝗲 reached Midoriya, stabbing him with one of her BLD sucking machines and starting to SCK. Midoriya gasped as he grabbed 𝗬𝗃𝗲's hand, which covered Midoriya's mouth in an attempt to muffle his scream, and glanced at 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 desperately before looking back at 𝗬𝗃𝗲 in shock and pain. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 let out a small sigh, not liking what 𝗬𝗃𝗲 was planning, and spoke up. He couldn't SCK as much BLD out that it would make him faint. That was just creepy and most likely too painful for the greenette. 𝗬𝗃𝗲, stop. 𝗬𝗃𝗲 looked at him and sighed as she retreated the needle from his skin, leaving startled Midoriya almost falling down as he felt his thigh, which got stabbed, weaken a little at the loss of BLD. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 pushed 𝗬𝗃𝗲 aside and 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 grabbed Midoriya by the collar. Midoriya's breath shook as he looked into 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍's cold, blue eyes. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍 closed his eyes before finally speaking, sorry? Midoriya's face was then covered by a hand, and not much later, his vision darkened and his eyes rolled to the back of his skull. Midoriya felt a headache that made his body heave, and he, even while being only partially conscious, wondered if it could drag him through the floor and straight to hell. That is, if he wasn't there already. He let himself breathe for a little before he managed to open my eyes. Everything was dark and Midoriya's vision was fuzzy with black stars covering his eyes, but he managed to get his sight clearer after blinking a couple times and scanned the room. The room was dark, with its curtains closed and a TV that illuminated most of it instead of lights. He didn't bother trying to recognize the channel, starting to scan the rest of the room, when he heard a female voice that caused him to flinch at its suddenness. Look who woke up, 𝗬𝗏𝗍𝗍. The girl that stabbed Midoriya earlier jumped from the shadowed part of the room and towards him, smiling eagerly. He bit his lip nervously as he remembered what she had done, trying to put on a brave facade. Where am I? What do you want from me? The blonde quirked an eyebrow at him playfully, batting her eyelashes dramatically, before pouting as if considering whether or not she should to tell him. Finally, shrugged and skipped wordlessly towards the seaweed color couch, leaning over its back and shaking someone awake. There was a light groan, and Midoriya instinctively tried to stand up to see who was the person on the couch, despite having a clear idea of the other person who was there when he was knocked out. He struggled against the duct tape for a little before giving up, knowing it was useless. To Midoriya's surprise though, the chair also seemed to be stuck to the ground with just duct tape, so it would be easy to rip it off the ground and then, oh! Midoriya heard a mumble from the couch. The mumbling was enough for him to recognize who it was, but as a confirmation, 𝗬𝗏𝗍𝗍 was now sitting up on the couch, looking at Midoriya. Is that really all you have to say about this? I thought you said you wanted to help, and yet I don't think this is helping much. Midoriya snapped at him, rising his hands in dismay. Well, at least as much he could, the tape keeping his wrists stuck to the arms of the chair. Yeah, sorry about that. Safety measures and all. It's temporary, we'll let you go soon. He mumbled lazily, standing up and walking towards Midoriya. Midoriya gritted his teeth as he looked him in the eyes, but as he guessed, 𝗬𝗏 didn't seem even a bit intimidated. 𝗬𝗏 then put his hand out to the side expectantly, and Toga handed him a knife. Midoriya's eyes opened wide, but before he could realize it, 𝗬𝗏 had cut through the tapes of Midoriya's hands. Midoriya couldn't help but let out a quiet sigh of relief as he moved his wrists around, hearing small cracks in response. He then realized that they hadn't untied his legs, and looked at 𝗬𝗏, slightly annoyed. "Safety measures?" he asked, his look disbelieving as a snort escaped him after 𝗬𝗏 nodded. "Yeah. And besides, I don't think you'll listen properly when you have a chance of escaping." 𝗬𝗏 shrugged. Midoriya frowned at him until 𝗬𝗏 let out a long sigh. "So, the thing is, you were sort of scolded and beaten up already." Midoriya blinked at him a few times, not sure what he meant. What I mean is you should actually be thanking Toga right now. She saved you from the major part of the gruesome fate you would have faced if she hadn't taken your spot. Hey, I still don't get what this is about. And why did you stab me?" He glanced at Toga, who was now standing next to 𝗬𝗏 in front of Midoriya. Toga narrowed her eyes at him and pouted, letting out an annoyed huff, but not responding. Midoriya knew that he had fainted because of lack of oxygen, and that she had simply stabbed him for fun, and it annoyed him and scared him to no end. "In other words, I turned into you, and took the punishment you received from that explosion guy. Gee, so ungrateful. You owe me BLD for entertainment as well now," Toga explained, still narrowing her eyes disapprovingly at Midoriya. Midoriya blinked at her in shock. Does she have a transformation quirk, or are they joking with me? And if she does, what did 𝗂𝗏 do to her? The last though made him shiver. "So you have a transformation quirk?" Toga let out a confused hum as she looked at 𝗬𝗏. 𝗬𝗏 let out a muffled laugh. "Is this really all you're concerned about? What quirk I have? Screw you. You know, if he wasn't a middle schooler and he would have been a bit stronger, I would have actually fainted." Toga spoke with her hands on her hips as she leaned close to him with her angry pout on her face. Sorry, but not really. You still stabbed me, you know." Midoriya noted. "Whatever. I would have more BLD if 𝗬𝗏 wouldn't have stopped me, so it's about time you start thanking us." Midoriya thought about it. Then he realized something. "Wait a minute. 𝗬𝗏, why did you let her stab me in the first place?" Midoriya suddenly exclaimed. 𝗬𝗏 facepalmed himself as he let out a loud, exhausted groan. This is going to take a lot of explaining. After explaining the whole situation to Midoriya, Midoriya bit his nails as he processed what he was told. "So in short, you two are friends. You asked Toga of a favor for me so that she would take the punishment for me. She got beaten up by 𝗂𝗏, scolded by the teachers, lectured by my mom, closed for house arrest, and you escaped to come back here and tell me all that. I still don't get why you would do so much for me though." Midoriya frowned. He was thankful, of course, but it seemed suspicious that villains like them would do such a favor to a person who didn't help them one bit, but only got them into trouble. "Well, you know, just 'cause we're badass and sometimes kill, doesn't mean that we don't help others too. Of course that doesn't really balance things out, but anyways, I still needed to practice feeling pain so that it won't hurt as much anymore." Toga giggled. Midoriya just sat there quietly, trying to process this. He just confirmed they were villains. Fine. He could get over that fact, and anyways, he already somewhat knew that. But the fact that Toga and 𝗬𝗏 had killed before, and they talk about it so easily, that was concerning. And he was still taped to the chair too. "Can you let me go now? I really have to move my legs," he laughed nervously. Toga took out a knife from her pocket and Midoriya was about to scream when she cut the tape around his legs quickly, thankfully not making a scratch. She stepped back and giggled at Midoriya's panicked expression before he bit his lip and stood up slowly and shakily. "I thought you'd use scissors for this," he mumbled. That made Toga laugh and hug his neck with one of her hands, pulling him closer to her as she ruffled his hair, which obviously made Midoriya flinch and shiver, and made 𝗬𝗏 roll his eyes playfully. "Nah, you should get used to this." Toga punches him a little too harshly on the shoulder with the hand that was holding the knife, making Midoriya turn his head around to stop panicking at how close her blade was to his throat when she did that. "I should go before Mom notices that I went off somewhere in house arrest after all, right?" Toga nodded shortly before starting to flip the knife in her hand, scanning Midoriya's body as if considering where was the best place to cut him. 𝗬𝗏 nodded in response. Yeah, sure. You're gonna have to walk alone though, we've already caused you enough trouble. Midoriya snorted at him and rolled his eyes playfully before walking straight towards the exit, making 𝗬𝗍 sigh in annoyance and partial defeat. As much as he wanted them to trust each other, it was going to take a long, long time. Midoriya as he grabbed the branches of the tree which he was climbing. Come on, a real hero could climb this tree up in a second, probably even without a quirk. Midoriya tried to cheer himself on as he pulled himself up again. Because he was on house arrest, he couldn't just show up on the house's doorstep and walk to his room. His mother would be mad to find out that his son sneaked out despite. Most likely, Midoriya didn't get all the details, after all, the rough scolding that he got from being involved in a fight. Midoriya then stood up on the tree branch reaching for his window. The window was open so he easily climbed in. Thanks Toga. He thought to himself as he closed the window behind him. He looked around. The room suddenly felt boring to him. Nothing to do but study and watch his favorite All Might video. It was kind of lonely too. He knew he couldn't confront his mom about it, and it made him feel even lonelier. But then he heard a thump. A very familiar one in fact. He turned towards his window and saw 𝗬𝗍 leaning on the wall of his room. He smirked at him and Midoriya smiled back. This machine sure, but it good too. Toga joked as she examined her canisters which were filled with 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗪 puns are lame. 𝗬𝗍 stated monotonously. Toga let out a dramatic huff and continued to examine her support item canisters while mumbling something about 𝗬𝗍 being the lame one. She then suddenly stopped and put her canisters down. You know I've been thinking about something? 𝗬𝗍 heard the change in her tone. It sounded more natural, and even more calm and sane, which was extremely unusual of her, and immediately cussed him to truly listen to what she was saying instead of tuning her out like usual. What is it? Well, you know, about the cutie, Izuku could technically be of great use to the League of Villains. 𝗬𝗍 didn't like where this was going, but he was curious. How can someone so innocent and incompetent of fighting be used to the League of Villains? His quirk was probably useless too since he didn't even use it to defend himself against Bakugo. How the hell would he be capable of that? 𝗬𝗍 snapped, both confused and annoyed. Wow, don't get so pissy. I know you've got a soft spot for the kid, but I bet he does too. 𝗬𝗍 let out a small teeth. He's going into high school next year, right? That means he's gonna have to go another school for high schoolers, right? Yeah, so. Toga hesitated for a second, seeming unsure of whether she was planning to say next, even if she tried not to show it. He could technically get into UA, right? Where All Might is gonna be working, right? 𝗬𝗍 was silent for a moment, processing what she said. Finally, he snorted, and then let out a sharp, almost amused laugh. Toga frowned at him, annoyed at being laughed at, before turning away. And pouting, regretting her previously seemingly good idea. You've got to be kidding me. I love Izuku and all, but he's nowhere the level of a beginner pro hero. He's got a useless quirk that can't be used in combat, and even if he does, he's not even willing to use it. I'm not even talking about his skin and bone body. It'd take a miracle. The two sat in silence afterwards for about a minute before Toga started to talk again. I told Shiggy about my idea and Izuku already. 𝗬𝗍's head snapped towards where Toga was sitting. You did what? You can't decide for him. So I told Shiggy in case Izuku accepts to be ready to help with a new willing member spy. Give Izuku a chance, 𝗬𝗍. Maybe Shiggy would have something to offer him, or maybe he despises heroes because they weren't able to protect them while you could. You know, that sort of dash. 𝗬𝗍 jumped off the roof towards another roof before Toga could finish and jumped down the emergency stairs. He ignored Toga as he rushed towards where he knew Midoriya's house was, annoyance and mostly anger making him speed up and scowl deeply. Toga didn't know what she had done, and now he had to warn Midoriya before the League of Villains got to him first, and if he didn't, and Midoriya refused, he didn't want to know what Shigaraki would do to the boy to keep their league undiscovered. Midoriya sighed as he closed his notebook shut. Seems like 𝗬𝗍 isn't going to visit today, probably busy with something. Midoriya knew that he was a villain, and that he was probably doing villainous things right now. And honestly, that made Midoriya feel uneasy. Wanting to become a hero like All Might was his #1 goal, yet here he was, having a villain defend him and fight for him, let alone them becoming friends. That wasn't very heroic of him, but he couldn't just pretend that 𝗬𝗲 didn't treat him better than many other people had. He owed him that much, at least. Yo Izuku, 𝗬𝗲 climbed through the window. Hey 𝗬𝗲. I didn't expect you to come today. What's up? Midoriya jumped from his chair and made his way towards 𝗬𝗲. 𝗬𝗲 leaned on the wall and glided a hand through his hair as he tried to catch his breath. He then took a deep breath and stood straighter. The group of 𝗵𝗃𝗻𝗄 wants to offer you a job. I was against it, I swear, but they are going to find a way to drag you into this. I came to warn -- Hey, calm down, catch your breath at least. Midoriya interrupted, kneeling beside the slumped-over man. 𝗬𝗲 went quiet, trying to calm his breathing, and Midoriya began to speak. It's all right. 𝗬𝗧 and you are gonna be there, right? The people in the league aren't all that bad if you guys are there, correct? It can't be bad if I don't reject them. 𝗬𝗲 stared at Midoriya, startled by the calmness in his voice. He took a deep breath. I don't know. Shigaraki's not completely sane. Even if you do agree to join, he may deny you and kill you anyway. He mumbled. He then let out a groan and rubbed his forehead tiredly, shaking his head. It was a terrible idea to get you into this mess. What will your mom think? And besides, judging by the posters on your walls, you won't be happy with Shigaraki's ambitions, Shigaraki. That's the boss. Midoriya asked as he opened a drawer and took a notebook, ripping a page out of it. Yeah. But if you agree to join, should Shigaraki let you, you'll be a major part of his plan, and I'm not sure you'll like it. At all. 𝗬𝗲 didn't want to tell him the actual plan, and he hoped he wouldn't ask. There were several reasons, but the reason that bothered him the most was that he'd think about 𝗬𝗲 as a totally different person if he told the ambitions of the man he followed, and with how much suspicion Midoriya had been looking at him not too long ago, he didn't want to break their trust. 𝗬𝗲, come on. Midoriya looked 𝗬𝗲 right into his eyes with a determined look. 𝗬𝗲 took a shaky breath and brushed his hand through his hair again. He was going to reject him, but if he was actually going to join, then he hates All Might. He wants to kill him. 𝗬𝗲 didn't dare look Midoriya in the eyes. He knew his expression wasn't something he'd want to remember. Kill All Might? 𝗬𝗲 nodded, still not looking at Midoriya. He heard Midoriya putting something on the table, and turned towards him to see Midoriya's eyes wide and his knees now to his chin on his knees as he bit his lip, seeming to try and process the idea. Should he not join, he'll most likely die. Should he join, he still might die, and he'd have to kill his favorite hero. 𝗬𝗲 had no idea what Midoriya must have been feeling. Hey! He called out hesitantly. I'll go. 𝗬𝗲 didn't answer at first. He thought he misheard. What? I said I'll go. Midoriya repeated, firmly but quietly. Take me to the villain group. We'll talk things out. 𝗬𝗲 almost leaped towards Midoriya, sitting in front of him, and grabbed him by his shoulder as he shook them a bit, as if to snap him out of a trance. Hey, this is serious. You can't go trusting them just based of how they treat me. Think about it, 𝗬𝗲, he said yes. Midoriya's and 𝗬𝗲's heads snapped towards the window. 𝗬𝗲 was crouching on the windowsill, her eyes holding a serious glint as she looked at 𝗬𝗲 and then at Midoriya. 𝗬𝗲, don't you understand how much his life would change if he would accept this? He'd be a villain. 𝗬𝗲, this is my choice. I'm not forcing myself right now, should he kill me or not. 𝗬𝗲 didn't look at Midoriya as he furrowed his brows and stood quietly, looking down instead. He didn't feel embarrassed about trying to protect Midoriya. He was still a child, whether he liked it or not, and he hated the fact that Midoriya did have the right to choose for himself. If he could have chose for him, whether or not Midoriya would have been angry at him for that, he would have rather keep Midoriya out of it as much as possible, given that he was a villain and they were now friends. I'm going with you, 𝗬𝗲 stated reluctantly. When we get there, don't say I didn't warn you. This will be your responsibility. 𝗬𝗲. Midoriya interrupted. 𝗬𝗲 went quiet again. Midoriya sighed, and both 𝗬𝗲 and 𝗬𝗲 could hear his breath shake. He's scared. Is he doing this because he thinks he has no choice? Is he scared of losing 𝗬𝗲? What is he thinking? 𝗬𝗲 hesitated. It was a bad idea. She was getting an innocent child who's done nothing bad in life before into a criminal world, a world that would change his life forever. But at the same time, meeting All for One could bring so much good into his life, she wasn't sure that the chance was worth missing. Either way, it was too late. Midoriya opened the door and called to his mom saying he was going out for a study session. Inko let him, and Midoriya closed his room again, feeling lucky to have a trusting mother, and yet still a little guilty to be lying to her. "Toga, can I change?" Toga simply nodded quietly and climbed out the window. Midoriya stood there, startled for a little while at her behavior. She isn't this quiet usually. She would have at least did some embarrassing joke about her staying to take a look. Midoriya took a shaky breath and started to change. He hoped that Toga and 𝗬𝗲𝗍 were over-exaggerating with their reactions. Otherwise, he may have made a step in a very wrong way. "You're not going to do any pranks on me right now, are you?" Midoriya asked nervously. Toga rolled her eyes. "Oh come on, I'm not that bad. I can't get your reputation ruined on your first meeting, right?" Midoriya tried his best to believe her as she held his hand and led Midoriya towards the hideout. Their boss, Shigaraki, told Toga to keep Midoriya in case he doesn't accept the offer, which only slightly relaxed Midoriya. He was still very nervous about meeting the boss and what he would do to him, now that he knew and connected with the organization. He just hoped he would make it out alive. "We're here." Toga snatched off the 𝗵𝗃𝗲 and Midoriya shut his eyes tightly. It didn't take him long to get adjusted to the light though, because it wasn't as bright as a room should be. There were no windows. He didn't know to accept it as good or bad news. No one could see him from outside and recognize him, but no one could see him and help him out should he get in trouble. A double-edged sword, albeit one side was way sharper than the other. "So you're the kid Toga was always blabbering about?" A hoarse voice snapped Midoriya out of his thoughts, and he tensed up even more. He looked at the man sitting in a bar stool, shoulder length, light, blue hair, face covered by a creepy-looking hand that seemed like a mask. When Midoriya tried to look into his eyes though, he saw nearly glowing, red eyes, and felt a shiver at the thought menace that was seeping through his glare. This was a real villain. Someone who either became a villain at a young age, or had devoted his life to the cause. He wasn't going to be let off the hook easily. "Why, sir?" "Shigaraki. Call me that." Obviously he'd be the boss. Midoriya gulped. "And I thought 𝗬𝗲𝗍 had an ominous aura." "All right, thank you, Shigaraki." Shigaraki stood up from the stool and Midoriya once again felt a shiver run down his spine. Shigaraki made his way towards him and Midoriya considered running away, but then Shigaraki leaned in to look Midoriya right in his face. He felt like those red eyes could cut right through him. "So, what's your quirk?" "Don't be embarrassed about it. Blondie already told me that it's not a fighting one. I'm not going to judge you by it." Midoriya gulped down. Of course, if he had a little more confidence, he would have asked what exactly Shigaraki wanted from him, but those red eyes, every last bit of it, so he could only answer. I don't have one." Midoriya stuttered. 𝗬𝗲𝗍's eyes widened, so did Toga's. Now that was a surprise, and definitely not an answer either of them expected. Although Shigaraki simply quirked an eyebrow and smirked at him, a strangely interested look on his face. "Oh." Shigaraki stood straighter, no longer leaning towards his face. That made Midoriya let out a shaky breath. He didn't notice he'd been holding. "That's quite rare nowadays. I'm guessing that's why the boy whom 𝗬𝗲𝗍 saved you from was attacking you in the first place, huh? Bullying. Must be tough." Midoriya bit his lip and slowly nodded. Right now, he couldn't read him. He could see a slight smile behind the hand, but he couldn't understand what he was actually feeling, and that was more terrifying than how easily he poured his soul out to the villain. "Then it's going to be even easier making a deal with you." "Great." Shigaraki laughed and patted Midoriya on the shoulder. Midoriya felt a light tickle and looked at his shoulder, only to see a slight hole in his hoodie. He stared at his shoulder for a long while until he heard Shigaraki's hoarse laughter once again. "My quirk disintegrates anything my 5 fingers touch." That was a good demonstration, but sorry about the hoodie anyways. Shigaraki shrugged and sat back on the bar stool. "Shigaraki, get down to business. He may not look like it, but you're really freaking him out." 𝗬𝗲𝗍 stated monotonously, glancing at Midoriya as he tried to hold back his annoyance and anger at how Shigaraki was treating Midoriya as a pet. "𝗬𝗲𝗍." Midoriya mumbled, embarrassed and horribly nervous. Shigaraki let out an obviously fake and annoyed chuckle. "I wouldn't be stretching this if I knew he wasn't. It's been a while." He then turned towards a TV-looking device with the words audio only on it. Sir, would you like to tell him or should I? He spoke tenderly towards the TV. I will tell him, 𝗵𝗃. A voice came from the device. Midoriya flinched, surprised, and blinked at the screen. Young Izuku-𝗧𝗵𝗃. It has a nice ring to it that suits you. Midoriya stood silently, not sure how to answer. If Shigaraki is counted for as the boss, then this man is a retired boss. Midoriya wondered. I've got an offer for you. Shigaraki told me about you, and I see you as the perfect opportunity to fulfill our goal. Killing All Might? Midoriya didn't hesitate, but for some reason he regretted saying it. It felt awful coming from him, the so-called All Might's biggest fan. How things change, yes. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 told you. Yeah, I told him. He should know what mess he's going into, right? 𝗬𝗵𝗃 spoke first, before Midoriya could make up an excuse for him. I see. Thank you, I guess I can skip that part. I don't think you have any hatred towards All Might, and the fact of killing someone definitely sounds awful. You won't have to kill anyone though. Midoriya couldn't help but let another shaky sigh of relief. I see that means a lot, thank you. Midoriya thanked quietly. He didn't expect the even more uncannily sounding villain to be even nicer than Shigaraki, but he surely didn't mind. This offer will favor you more than us actually, but it matters to us nonetheless. As long as you do as I say, there shouldn't be a problem. Midoriya nodded unsurely, but then managed a small okay. What do I have to do? Midoriya asked as confidently as he could. It's easy really. You're going to be attending the UA's hero course and will tell us everything you do there, especially if it revolves outside trips and All Might. They want me to get into UA. To meet All Might as well. Hero course. What in the world are they thinking? I am sorry, sir, but there's no way in getting into UA, let alone the hero course. Didn't you hear about me being quirkless? I won't be able to pass the physical entrance exam, let alone hold onto my place in the hero course. Calm down, child, I'm not finished. I'm not just going to send you and hoping for luck to be on our side. Midoriya bit the insides of his cheeks. I have a chance on getting in UA, but what can possibly happen for me to be accepted? A recommendation? Is this villain someone famous and able to get me into the hero course? You see, my quirk's name is All for One. So is my villain name. I can take and give any quirk I have or someone within the range of my touch. Midoriya tensed, and as much as he slowly began to get happier at the thought, it was scary how the man could take away something that matters so much in the current society without so much of a thought. I've never heard of that quirk before, he noted quietly. A quirk that can take a give quirks. If this man is really a villain, he could have taken over the world with that sort of quirk by now. Midoriya tensed even more. I can give you a quirk. A good one. I actually have one in mind already. Midoriya started at the device. Unblinking, Shigaraki overdramatically leaned over to see Midoriya's reaction and let out an approving snort and stood straight back up. He's out of it, Shigaraki joked, more to himself than the others. Willing to give me a quirk, get me into UA, and all I have to do is give you information about what we're doing? Indeed. It's as simple as that. Midoriya bit his checks. It can't be this easy, it just can't. What's the catch? You chose me because I could easily be manipulated into agreeing to take a quirk? Midoriya stated more than asked, glancing at Shigaraki with realization rather than annoyance or sadness. Even if they did, he was thankful. Who cared how he was getting a quirk, and that was all that mattered to the greenette. Partially. All for One admitted. But then, I'm not completely a monster. I've seen few quirkless children like you, very few, and all are dead of suicide or murder by now. Although, your passion is truly admirable, and it's only missing one piece. A quirk. Midoriya shut his eyes tightly and took a deep breath. He could get a quirk. He could get a quirk, but he would officially be connected to villains. If anyone finds out about this, it will all be over. Not even a quirk would help him become a hero after that. But at least he'll be normal. Wanting to be a hero was always dependent on that factor, and that was all he wanted his entire life. To be normal, to want to hear all the things I'll have to do to keep my quirk and all the things you would do for me to stay loyal with you. I want to make sure I don't miss out on anything. Midoriya, are you serious? You're joining? 𝗬𝗵𝗵 asked, just barely audibly panicked. Not yet. I want to hear everything again. You're considering it? Obviously. Midoriya, you have to understand I'll think this through. I promise 𝗬𝗵𝗵, whatever choice I make, I won't regret it. Midoriya put on his determined look. Oh, 𝗬𝗵𝗵's sensitive towards you, isn't he? Shigaraki placed a hand around Midoriya's shoulder, and Midoriya visibly shrunk, not forgetting about his ruined hoodie. Luckily, Shigaraki simply seemed to be teasing 𝗬𝗵𝗵, and no more harm was done to his hoodie as much as it was to 𝗬𝗵𝗵's patience. Indeed, I will repeat myself as many times as you need me to, and I'll give you time to choose, let's say a week. All for one offered. Yes, thank you very much. Midoriya sounded slightly enthusiastic, but 𝗬𝗵𝗵 and Toga could hear the worry in his voice. So could Shigaraki, apparently. Don't worry, kid, we don't bite. And treachery receives punishment worse than death, so no one will be revealing your relationship with us. Shigaraki smirked, and Midoriya let out an awkward smile. The opposing statement was left unannounced, but Midoriya knew what he was hinting at. Should he betray them, he wouldn't just be revealed as a traitor, but would have to face whatever punishment they decide for him too. He didn't want to know if Shigaraki's quirk worked on people, and if it did, he wanted to avoid angering him as much as possible. Now, please leave the bar temporarily. Give us a few minutes so that he wouldn't have any outside pressure while he is thinking. All for one announced, and everyone left obediently. Midoriya gulped nervously as he stepped closer towards the device. Although, before he could speak though, All for One spoke first. You've already decided, haven't you? All for One stated more than asked. Midoriya shifted nervously. All for One was right, but even so, Midoriya didn't want to admit it. He was being too easy, and it was terrifying to him at how 𝗵𝗵𝗃 he was as soon as he caught a scent of candy for Quirkless. You don't have to admit it to me, but I can hear it in your voice. You want to believe you would take your time to consider such an important matter, but that can't be the case. Getting a quirk got you too eager to choose anything other than accepting. Midoriya shook his head to himself. I can't believe it. He can read me inside out, he can't even see me, he does this by voice alone, through a device. Who is this man? I still want to know what I'm going for. Midoriya managed, his voice unsteady, his lie weak and uncertain, most likely understood by All for One. Nonetheless, All for One answered calmly. Understandable. Let's begin. It was a pleasure to finally get to know you, young Izuku. All for One finished as Midoriya managed a smile to himself, trying to cheer himself up. Yes, I'm glad to have met you. He murmured and quickly left the bar, shocked, nervous, embarrassed, and lots of other emotions making his dizzy. He closed the door behind him and let himself slide down the wall and sat on the floor, closing his face with his hands. He had just committed a crime. He's now a part of the so-called League of Villains, and despite All for One making it clear this was temporarily partnership, he knew that this would be a part of his life forever. It was a thought that was slowly processing, but processing nonetheless. Izuku, how did it go? Toga's voice came from behind him, and as he was about to turn around, Toga jumped on him and hanged onto his neck, legs around his waist. Midoriya blushed severely and tried not to fall down under her weight. It was all right. He grunted, Toga's weight heavy on his back. Oh come on, why are your legs shaking so much? I'm not that heavy. She pouted and jumped off of Midoriya's back. What does all right mean, 𝗵𝗃? Are you still considering it? 𝗬𝗵𝗵 asked, coming from where Toga had jumped as well. Well, two agreed. He knew he was making a fatal mistake, but he didn't want to lie either. And either way, he was going to come back to the hideout again in 2 days to get his training started, so there was no way he'd be able to hide his decision for long either. Better now than later, he tried to assure himself. You what? Didn't you say you'd think about it first? 𝗬𝗵𝗵 snapped, angry and shocked. Disturbed too, to be honest. He had accepted so easily, obviously he'd be suspicious as to why he'd agree to something as major as that without too much thinking. I did, 𝗬𝗵𝗵. Trust me, I thought about it very well and I know this will bring me so many opportunities. I could finally become a true rival to those who want to be heroes. 𝗬𝗵𝗵 sighed and rubbed his temple. You really would do anything to become as powerful as Explosion Boy? He mumbled, only partially wanting to say it, knowing it would disappoint Midoriya. And it did, badly, but Midoriya tried his best to sound confident. I want to be someone that could actually fight against him, 𝗬𝗲𝗍? Yeah, whatever. He muttered, and then started to walk away, hands in his pockets, kicking a bottle angrily. Midoriya sighed. Things are about to change drastically, aren't they? I can only hope they will change for the better, alright? You do understand that you're about to go through hell, don't you? Toga jumped playfully next to Midoriya as they walked in the back alleys of the city, which was a shortcut that he usually walked with 𝗬𝗲𝗍 or Toga to avoid 𝗵𝘃𝗲. He rarely walked with Toga alone, because 𝗬𝗲𝗍 was usually the one with him, but he was still at Midoriya for choosing to partner with the League. He'll get over it eventually. As a matter of fact, I think he's trying to be all parent-like, but he's really happy about this. Toga had explained when he asked her about 𝗬𝗲𝗍. I'm ready to go through hell and back if that means I'll get a quirk. Toga rolled her eyes over dramatically, and Midoriya ignored her, his words not exaggerated even in the slightest. If that's what it took, he'd do it. I hope you mean what you said. Toga mumbled, and they continued walking towards his house, not saying another word, when a voice stopped them. Hey kiddos. Midoriya and Toga stopped and turned towards the person who seemed to have called them. It was a man in his 40s, his face wrinkled slightly and his eyebrows too thick and black for his blonde hair, which was even more of a mess than Midoriya's, if that was even possible. Sup? Toga asked casually, her hands crossed on her nonchalantly, and her foot kicking back and forth almost excitedly, but casually nonetheless. Midoriya tensed. Didn't your mommies warn you allies are dangerous? Midoriya knew where this was going, and tried his best not to panic, but Toga simply quirked an eyebrow at him playfully, not showing even the slightest hint of hesitance or any movement towards the streets. We'll be out in a second. Midoriya took Toga's hand in his and started pulling her away from the man, not wanting any trouble. The last thing he wanted was for Toga to suddenly get BLD thirsty and kill him, ugly or not, just because she was annoyed and hadn't drank BLD in a while. Now do you really think I'll let you off without teaching you a lesson? Few bruises should do a job. The man stated. He then laughed hoarsely and somewhat maniacally, and Midoriya shivered, mostly from disgust. He didn't feel at all intimidated, probably because of Shigaraki and All for One. Now those are ones with an aura that's dark enough to make you shiver just from looking at them. Instead, he simply felt disgusted by how drunken and pathetic the man looked, and whether or not he could teach them a lesson, he didn't feel like messing with someone like him. Do homeless villains have to live with people like these? Did 𝗬𝗲𝗍 live like this? I don't think we should be the one taught a lesson though. Toga smirked, snapping Midoriya out of his thoughts as she stood her ground stubbornly. Oh really? Try not be all intimidating. He then rose his hand, and Midoriya saw his palm glowing a dangerous red. Much like Bakugo's when he readied an explosion. Not good. You're gonna get a few burns for that then too? The villain snickered. He then started to rush towards them, but before he could reach his hands towards their faces, Toga took out a knife from her shoe in a second, but to even greater surprise, she shoved it into Midoriya's hand, closing the knife in Midoriya's hand, making him grip it, and swung using his hand, stabbing the man right into his throat. Toga stepped back, and Midoriya shook in shock and fear as he slowly processed what happened, the bloodied knife still in his hand as he looked down at the sight in front of him. The man was laying on the ground, choking and coughing up BLD, his hands around his throat, eyes rolling back as he tried to breathe, the BLD pouring out of his wound and into his throat, choking him. Midoriya would never forget how terrible the man looked at that moment. He didn't think things could get any worse, when Toga leaned towards him, pressing her mouth against his ear and whispering into his ear. Finish him off, Izu. Toga's voice sounded different. He spun around to look into her eyes, and saw it was indescribable. A look he's never seen before. Toga was always crazy, but this was something beyond. She looked like a maniac, yet sane, that observed Midoriya and glanced at the man bleeding out on the floor, her eyes serious but shining as a sadistic curve appeared on the corner of her lips. What? You used my hand to hurt him, and now you want me to finish him off. I'm not killing anyone, that was a part of the deal with the League, remember? He spun around again to check on the man. He was still choking and coughing up. Midoriya felt like he was about to throw up. Toga used him to land an attack that will kill him slowly and painfully. He was still alive, still struggling for breath, still clutching at his throat as he tried to cover up the wound, to stop bleeding out, hoping those wouldn't be his final moments. Midoriya felt his stomach churn. He's hurting, Izuku. He wants you to finish him off. He's in so much pain. Come on. Do it. Midoriya felt tears roll down his cheeks, and let out an uncontrolled sob as he closed his mouth trying to hold back from screaming. He was the one that made him like this. He was the one that was about to be officially considered a murderer. Should he consider screaming the murder on purpose or not, would be considered his fault. He couldn't call for help, and yet, there is one thing he could do that would slightly make things better, even if it wouldn't help the fact that the man was dying. Toga, I can't do it. I won't do it. Toga, Suddenly, Toga pushed Midoriya, and Midoriya ended up tripping over the quaking man, who was probably seconds from being unconscious but still in pain. He breathed shallowly as he looked at the man, terrified at the pain in his almost fully rolled back eyes, his body quivering. Help him. Midoriya didn't move. Do it, Izuku? Midoriya felt his grip on the knife tighten as a knot formed in his throat, and even worse, one in his stomach. I said do it. Midoriya swung his arm backwards, and used all momentum possible to plunge the knife into the man's throat again, ripping it out and stabbing him again another time. And again. And again. Seconds later, the body was completely still. Midoriya managed to crawl away a little right before puking, still gripping the knife in his hand as the stench of blood filled his nose, making him want to heave again and again. He felt disgusted. He was shaking uncontrollably and he couldn't speak. Hell, he wanted to scream even if it attracted people who would blame him for murder, but he couldn't. The image wouldn't go away, and when Toga slowly came up to him and cupped his face into her hands, the slight turn of the head revealing the dead man again in the corner of his eyes, he snapped his head away and threw up again, ending up heaving dryly as he ran out of food to puke. Toga let out an exhausted sigh and sat next to Midoriya slowly begging him to recover from the heaving. You're gonna have to get used to this. If not, you'll end up like this in front of the league when they kill someone. When you kill someone. Midoriya shivered and gasped for air. Which? He asked shakily, his voice cracking as he continued, it was a part of the deal that I wouldn't kill. I don't need to kill Toga, and if someone was murdered in front of me, I could have at least looked away. But you forced me to finish him off. Why would you? Midoriya had never heard himself as desperate as that, and if not for the panic, he would have been terrified at how weak he sounded. He hadn't sounded like that even with Bakugo, and he was the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Before this he sobbed uncontrollably and let himself fall backwards, laying on his back and turning onto his side, hiding his face and putting his knees close to his stomach, trying his best to calm down the images of the man that was now dead right behind him. He heard Toga stand up and start to walk somewhere, and heard something being dragged. Someone. Midoriya wasn't an idiot, it was that man being dragged. After the dragging sound faded away slightly, he heard a click and a flicker, and heard a cackling of a flame. He knew what was going on. It made perfect sense. But he wasn't going to look. Not anymore. He wasn't going to continue looking at him. Toga watched the burning man's skin slowly start to blacken, and rubbed her temples as she turned towards Midoriya, who didn't dare turn around to see the even more gruesome sight. Izuku, hear me out? Midoriya tried to calm down. He wasn't willing to listen, but he wanted to calm down so that he'd be able to run away the second he could stand. With how easily she managed to overpower him, he wouldn't be able to run away if at least his mind wasn't clear, and she was obviously way more calmer and rational than him at the moment. Deep breaths, this man was a villain. Villains are people who kill. Villains are people who have destructive quirks. Villains are people who pretend. Villains are people with abusive families. Villains are people who pretend to feel mighty. Villains are simply corrupt people. You re a hero, right? It's your job to get rid of them. We did him a favor. He hated his life, that was obvious. Couldn't you see how messed up he was? He did that to himself because he hated himself. Think of it as us ending his suffering. Midoriya simply shook his head, not wanting to believe her, even if what she said was true. It was still disgusting, awful. Toga sighed again. You won't understand at first. But as time passes by, you'll understand that not all people want to live if they're alive. Some were waiting for a moment like this to come so they could blame fate for finally being freed of their pathetic lives. And you just happened to be his lucky fate. Toga then walked away. Midoriya continued to lay on the floor, listening to the fire cackling. Before leaving, he took off his uniform vest and wrapped it around his waist, ignoring the fading cackling fire and hoping the stains wouldn't be noticed by any passerby. When he laid in bed, he prayed to not wake up the next day. I promised to not regret this, but if this is what I'll have to face. Midoriya was conflicted. Well, conflicted is a weak term to describe what Midoriya was feeling, but more or less accurate. He had killed a man. Not directly, at least not at first. His hand was used to kill a man, which Midoriya still wasn't sure whether that was a crime or not. And then he actually finished him off, this time more by himself despite the pressure Toga kept putting on him as the man struggled to live. How was he supposed to so calmly live with that thought? How did Toga, 𝗳𝗵𝗃, hell, even Shigaraki, deal with these situations? Or did they already simply get so used to it they walked away without so much as a second thought? No, at least that didn't feel like 𝗳𝗵𝗃. Did 𝗳𝗵𝗃 kill people before? Probably, despite the thought making Midoriya shiver. How did he cope with it? Did he feel the same nausea? The heavy weight on his body, as if he was carrying the corpse on his shoulders. If not, then did he feel any empathy for whom he killed? It was troubling how easily people can take away a life. Also, how easily that can go unnoticed and unpunished. Who knows, maybe the teenagers or drunken people that will pass by would pay no mind to the leftover stink and the strange puddle at which flies and other insects would gather, for the sake of not giving away that they were either dealing drugs, or not raising suspicion that they were a part of whatever happened. People were selfish. Midoriya felt like he was an exception, at least, up until this point. Why did he think he was so special? He didn't know. Those thoughts kept racing through his head throughout all of the following day after the murder. He was supposed to meet the League too, which, much to his dislike and fear, meant seeing Toga and 𝗳𝗵𝗃 as well. 𝗳𝗵𝗃 would certainly notice how distant the two teenagers grew, and he was bound to ask questions, Midoriya knew he would have to answer, but also felt like couldn't. He didn't want to admit his crime, no matter how obvious the taint in his mind could appear on the inside. Although, when his table shook and a loud thump sounded, he was snapped out of his thoughts, eyes widening as he flinched and turned towards the angry blonde beside him. Hey Dad, are you even listening? Deaf but nerd. Midoriya bit his lip nervously. Had he been ignoring Bakugo all the time while he was thinking? How long was that? And how did he make the fuming male? Oh, well, Bakugo grabbed his collar and pulled him up, forcing him to stand. Can't help but notice how pathetic you look. You seemed even more stressed than you are with me. Bakugo stated seriously but not tenderly. At least, no tenderness sounded in his voice, but Bakugo's next words made him tense unwillingly. Who the F is Scarface? He looks like a goddamn villain, and if you're messing with him, you better cut that 𝗧𝗃𝗃 out. His voice was low, a serious glint in his eyes fusing with his anger, showing an intimidating look that certainly affected Midoriya. Midoriya gulped nervously. He couldn't tell Bakugo that 𝗳𝗵𝗃 was a villain, and that'd obviously be a lie by how Bakugo was looking at him, expecting more of a confirmation rather than an answer. He's a nice person? Midoriya mumbled vaguely. Nice or not, as stupid as you are, you should know better than to mess with shady people like him. I'm not about to go and try to calm Auntie down should you go missing if idiot. Midoriya's eyes widened. It almost sounded like he cared. No, it sounded like he cared. Bakugo wasn't able to express emotion like that, at least, not that Midoriya ever seen him do that, but right now, it was clearer than ever. As rude as his comment was, it was true. A warning. A Bakugo version of, take care. To be honest, it made Midoriya wonder if his choice was truly one worth not regretting. School ended and Midoriya ran out of school and walked onto the street. He didn't feel like going into the back alley, especially if the corpse was still there, which was most likely the case. Why would anyone bother taking care of a corpse, especially without reporting it? He made his way back home, greeted his mom, and did everything a son should do not to raise suspicion, even if 𝗵𝗃𝗃 had asked him if he was feeling alright nonetheless. Mother's instincts, most likely, but she let it go quickly. He went to his room saying a quick goodnight. He was one of the lucky kids to have some privacy. His mom wasn't one to go into his room, especially if he was sleeping, so it was no trouble to get changed to go outside for the meeting. What the problem was, though, was climbing out the window. He was scared enough to climb up, but at least he didn't have to look down that time he was taken to 𝗳𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗏's apartment. But this time was different. He gulped heavily and opened his window. He studied the tree, and before he knew it, he placed a foot onto a branch and swung forward. He grabbed onto the tree trunk and wrapped his arm around it, stretching his other arm to close the window. He managed to climb down, despite plummeting the last few meters, and started to walk towards their meet-up place. All that was left was hope that he would be able to turn away before someone else is killed by the villains he was soon to call his allies. He wouldn't be able to stomach another murder. "You came. I was getting worried." A sarcastic voice sounded from behind the alley of the /store, and Midoriya took a deep, nervous breath. There's no way back now. He turned the corner and stood in front of Shigaraki. With the boss was a man whose head was covered in black mist, whom he'd recognized as the bartender. Midoriya nodded silently in greeting, and the man nodded back in understanding and greeting silently as well. "Of course I'd come. I've made my decision, and I'm sticking with it." Midoriya managed to say that confidently, and that raised his confidence even more. It was rare that he tried to make an impression, but it seemed to be going fairly well, at least so far. Shigaraki hummed in response before turning towards the mist man. "𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, let's go." The mist around the man named 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 spread into an irregular oval, large enough to go through, which Midoriya assumed was a portal. Shigaraki motioned Midoriya to follow him, and without waiting for him stepped into the portal and disappeared. Midoriya hesitated for a second, but quickly stepped behind him, not forgetting to take a quick, reassuring deep breath beforehand. 𝗳𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 were the only people not counting Shigaraki, 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, and Midoriya that had just stepped in, that were in the bar. Midoriya blamed his luck that he had almost no one other than his friends to focus on, and so he had to focus completely on Shigaraki to not look their way. He hoped 𝗳𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 wouldn't notice and what 𝗃𝗃 would think. "Hey, Izuku." 𝗳𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 greeted, Midoriya immediately noticing the first-name basis. Midoriya smiled at him sheepishly and quickly, before biting his lip and turning back towards the boss, feeling his throat clench tightly. "So, do you know what exactly we'll be doing today?" Shigaraki made his way towards the bar stool he sat on last time, and placed his chin on his hand. Midoriya shrugged and shook his head, signaling he wasn't sure. "We're giving you a quirk today." Midoriya went quiet, gaping at Shigaraki, not sure how to react. He felt happy, shocked, and uncertain, and all that was in the face of a middle schooler with what looked like a face full of uncertainty and confusion, which caused Shigaraki to snicker and shake his head in amusement. "It's not the quirk that we want to give you in the end, but we want to get your body adjusted before we give you the final quirk." Midoriya bit his cheek and started to smile, not being able to stop himself. "It'll be painful. You might feel awful the next few days. You might reject the quirk for weeks as a matter of fact. Hopefully that won't happen though." Midoriya tried to be anxious and unsure, just to show how he understood what he was being told, but he still couldn't stop himself from smiling. "DMN. Aren't you enthusiastic? Can't blame you though, I guess." Shigaraki put a hand around Midoriya's shoulder as he spoke, and despite being worried about his new hoodie, he couldn't help but continue smiling. Shigaraki then stood straighter and turned towards the speaking device. "𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃." Shigaraki called out. "Warp him here, 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃." All for one announced from the device. "Understood." 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 replied shortly. 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 then stepped towards Midoriya and turned into a warp portal. Just like they did next to the store, Shigaraki walked in first, and just as Midoriya was going to follow, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "You can still decline, you know that, right?" 𝗳𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 spoke quietly. Midoriya stood still for a little. At that moment, he felt how calming it would be if he declined and went home, returning to his life without villains, but there was no going back. No matter how much he wanted to, it was too late, and the quirk was so close. Now finally within his reach, Midoriya started to walk forward and the grip on his shoulder loosened and disappeared. Just as he was about to step in, he stopped, glancing over his shoulder. "Thanks, 𝗬𝗲𝗍," Midoriya thanked quietly. But before 𝗬𝗲𝗍 could say anything, he stepped into the portal, closing his eyes as he felt the exciting feeling spreading throughout his body despite the worry of what was to come. It was fine. In the end, it will be worth it. "You're awake, 𝗬𝗲𝗍?" He heard an unfamiliar voice. Midoriya shivered and snapped out of his thoughts, concentrating on what was in front of him. His head and eyes hurt as his eyes were tired and vision blurred. "You may feel tired. Your body didn't try to reject the quirk though, it's just a side effect." Midoriya tried to understand where the voice was coming from, but he couldn't concentrate. His mind felt blank and he could barely think. "Anyways, the quirk I gave you may be powerful, but by itself, it's small and manageable. It isn't the quirk I wanted to give you, I was just testing to see your reaction. I'll repeat all this again when you're in a better state. You seem completely out of it." Midoriya didn't respond. He breathed shallowly as he tried to concentrate on keeping conscious. "I'll assign 𝗬𝗲𝗍 to make sure you make it home. Do not worry, it's Quirkless." Midoriya slowly opened his eyes and looked at his mom. She was looking at him, panicked, and Midoriya began to worry. What's wrong?" He felt his voice was weak, but he tried his best not to show it. He was in his room. When had he gone to bed? Did he dream what happened yesterday? And what exactly happened yesterday? "Izuku, I think you have a fever burning up." Midoriya quirked an eyebrow and felt his forehead. Only then did he feel how wet his t-shirt was, and as soon as he touched his forehead his hand became wet too, his body coated with sweat and feeling uncomfortably hot. "Oh, sorry." Midoriya apologized, not sure how to react. He didn't get sick often. As a matter of fact, the last time he got sick was years ago, so he didn't know how to react. All he knew was that his mom was always panicked when that happened, and he hated it. What he hated more, though, was that he still didn't understand what happened. "I'll go get a towel," Inko mumbled worriedly and hurried out of his room. He slowly reached for his phone and looked at the time. "I overslept. What happened to my alarm?" He mumbled to himself, turning on his phone and checking his alarms. To his greatest surprise, all his alarms had been turned off. Midoriya thought aloud. "I don't remember doing that. Why would I do?" Midoriya hissed as he felt his head begin to ache and put his phone down, trying to relax to ease the pain. "What did they do to me? They tested my body, right? Something like that, I can't remember." Midoriya closed his eyes and concentrated. He remembered being taken through a portal. Seems like he fell unconscious after that, but why? Why would he fall unconscious? What happened there? And what was the exact reason he was walking into the portal anyways? Body preparations for his future quirk. Most likely, but Midoriya couldn't remember. "Izuku, I got the towel," Inko announced, hurrying towards Midoriya worriedly. She put the towel onto Midoriya's forehead, and Midoriya smiled as much as he could, but it still turned out be weak as he let out a tired yawn. "You're skipping school today, I'll go call them." Midoriya didn't have time to answer as Inko rushed out of the room, closing the door behind him in a hurry. Midoriya lay in silence, thinking about how strange it was that he only remembered walking into the portal with Shigaraki. Although nothing came to mind, and he let his tired mind and body go back to sleep. Midoriya got better in days. That surprised Inko, and she clearly was concerned when Midoriya started to change into his uniform. "Izuku, are you sure you're okay with this? You just got better, what if you start feeling unwell again?" "Mom, I'll be fine. I'll be surrounded by others, so even if something does happen, they'll notice." That wasn't a lie, but wasn't all the truth either, as much as he hated admitting it. He was going to be with the League of Villains today, and Toga was going to be the one in school for him. Toga, despite dropping out of school and being a crazy-minded girl, was smarter than Izuku, since she dropped out in high school and remembered a few things from that time. "Hey, Izuku." Midoriya turned towards where 𝗬𝗲𝗍 was now sitting, right in the frame of the window. Midoriya smiled at him warmly, glancing at the door before walking up towards the villain. "Hey." Midoriya greeted. "Toga's already going to school, so that's taken care of." "Out the door or window?" 𝗬𝗲𝗍 offered. "My mom is downstairs, so door." "Lame excuse, but whatever." Midoriya rolled his eyes and went through the door despite the teasing. Once out of the house, Midoriya put on his hood as well as 𝗬𝗍𝗶, and the two began walking towards where Kurojirai was supposed to meet them. Midoriya couldn't help but worry that this meeting was going to change his fate completely, once and for all. If there was even the slightest chance of quitting before, it will all be gone once he gets his quirk. And yet, all that was left was anticipation when he stepped through the portal. "How are you feeling, Midoriya?" Shigaraki asked after Midoriya stepped in, not bothering properly greeting him. "I'm alright. I had a fever at first, but I'm better now." Midoriya didn't mention his memory loss. He didn't want them knowing that his mind couldn't handle something as simple as a test. "Well, you're standing, so that's great," Shigaraki noted. "Anyway, we'll be giving you a quirk today." "A quirk? So, there won't be any training beforehand." "Change of plans. The quirk will help you with your training, but we're more concerned with your ability to control the quirk." Midoriya nodded and smiled. Although, 𝗬𝗍𝗶 furrowed his brows as he noticed something he hadn't before. He's acting like he didn't get one already. Sure, it may be a small one and not one worth thinking about too much, but he's quirkless. He should have had some different reaction than that, shouldn't he? 𝗬𝗍𝗶 glared at Shigaraki, who was smirking at Midoriya as he kept on thanking him. Something was off, and he didn't like it in the slightest. "Let's go." Midoriya nodded, and the same warp portal as yesterday was created by Kurojirai. They stepped in, and Midoriya readied himself to fall unconscious again, but that didn't happen. He opened his eyes, blinking in confusion as he turned towards Shigaraki. "Last time I fell unconscious, didn't I? Why am I awake now?" "This time, we want you to see whom is giving you the quirk. He thinks you deserve to meet each other more personally." Midoriya took a deep breath and Shigaraki smirked at him, almost proudly. He then turned towards the monitors to their right and Midoriya looked there too. He couldn't believe he didn't see the chair that was in front of them, and someone was sitting on it. He had no face. A mouth with a smile but no eyes, no nose. Midoriya felt like throwing up, but he just kept on staring, shocked, at the being in front of him. It was terrifying, and he felt his 𝗧𝗍𝗃 awfully as he tried to calm his breathing. Smart Manufacturing sponsored by Mitsubishi Electric. Read more. I am all for one. I know it's surprising to have a person looking like this, but I am a human being. Midoriya continued to gape at him in disbelief, trying to ease his expression. "Unusual, right? Most likely. That's why I'm not going to blame your reaction." Midoriya took a deep breath as he slowly relaxed his expression, but kept it on alert, not wanting to be relaxed with the non-human-looking man. He couldn't even feel embarrassed, all embarrassment replaced by fear and attempting to keep a cool head. "Do you want to know the quirk you'll be getting?" All for one asked, the smile plastered on his face on fading as he watched as much as he could, without having eyes Midoriya's nervous fidgets. "Yes, sir." Midoriya managed. He was trembling, and he hoped all for one wouldn't notice. No matter how scared he was of him, he was really worried about his impression. "Come here. I'll give it to you. It'll be a surprise." Midoriya stood still, glued to the floor in fear. "Come there." To him. "I don't want to do I have to." "Come on kid, don't be shy." Shigaraki pushed him towards all for one a bit too harshly, and despite knowing Shigaraki was most likely doing this on purpose, he couldn't help the panic overwhelming him as he shuddered, and despite the fear he was thankful that the push was enough to get him standing right in front of all for one. "Lean down a little." Midoriya leaned on one of his knees. He looked up at him, and felt another wave of terror wash over as he saw a face without features, yet his smile was wicked enough without anything else. Suddenly his eyes were covered by a hand, and Midoriya shook uncontrollably, breathing shallowly. "It'll hurt. Probably a lot, but it won't last long." Midoriya kept on breathing shallowly and shaking, and he felt his forehead began to sweat, despite all for one's hand being deadly cold. He felt pain. An awful headache that Midoriya let out quietly. He felt different. Not in a powerful way, it was just his surroundings felt different. "You woke up. Just in time. You should make it home soon enough to not worry your mom." He heard a familiar voice and slowly opened his eyes. He was on the floor, his head on Toga's legs. "Where am I?" Midoriya managed. His head felt like it was going to tear apart, and it kept pulsing as well with every small movement. You were unconscious after the procedure, and Shigaraki carried you here. What quirk did you get? Toga dismissed. Midoriya no longer could feel anger towards her, just relief that there was someone to help him understand what was going on, even if she did make his head hurt even more by asking questions. I have a quirk. Midoriya wasn't sure to state it or to ask. He knew he had a quirk, but the fact just won't sink in. I have a quirk. I have a quirk, Midoriya repeated happily, a small smile forming on his face as he flinched at the even greater headache from the small action. Although, the smile didn't fade, and he even chuckled weakly to himself, feeling his eyes tear up in realization. Toga rose an eyebrow and looked at him, confused. I'm sorry, I just can't believe it, Midoriya mumbled. Spit it out. I want to know. Toga said excitedly, scooting slightly closer towards Midoriya, who was laying on the ground. He doesn't know his quirk. A croaky voice came from the bar stool. What do you mean? Toga asked, slightly shocked and irritated. I'll tell you, Shigaraki stated, a playful smirk on his face as he caught sight of the excitement on Midoriya's face as the green net waited impatiently. It's an energy stockpiling quirk? Shigaraki finally said. Midoriya and Toga went silent, slowly processing what they were told. An energy stockpiling quirk? Midoriya's voice rose with shock and slight excitement. Yeah. You're a lucky one, kid. It's pretty powerful, increases strength and speed and all that. Midoriya laughed from happiness, and sat up, on the couch he was laying on, smiling happily. He almost forgot about his headache, and he almost blacked out when he sat up, but he didn't let that kill his mood as he once again leaned back, this time turning so he could sit up against the back of the couch. Hey, easy kid, Shigaraki stated, walking away as if he didn't care despite the previous statement. Toga, of course, noticed that. Looks like you're getting a soft spot for Izuku too. Toga purred. Shut up, all of you are brats, and don't you dare think otherwise. Shigaraki excused as he stomped away childishly, and Midoriya couldn't help but smile as Toga started giggling and running after Shigaraki, trying to hug him as she dodged his hand which almost reached her. Trying to disintegrate her. Despite the danger of the game, at least that's what it looked like to Toga, he couldn't help but smile at them and the few others that were watching, or trying to get them apart from there to fight. This was the first time he felt like he was surrounded by people that weren't troubled or embarrassed being around him. It almost felt like family. Midoriya didn't tell 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀. He kept quiet about his quirk to everyone except for his mom. He made up a story about how he discovered it too, to not sound suspicious. Mom, can we talk? Midoriya knew there was no going back after those words. Yes, sweetie. Is something wrong? Inko put down the knife with which she was cutting carrots for dinner. Midoriya inhaled slowly and a smile slowly creeped on his face, his eyes truly shining with happiness he hadn't felt in a long time. Momi got a quirk? He exclaimed, not being able to contain his excitement. Now that the headache faded away, he understood just how truly amazing having a quirk was, and a powerful one for that matter. It almost felt like a dream, and yet he knew it wasn't. He didn't get a response from his mother, though. He looked at his mom questioningly, but then saw the tears in her eyes. He exclaimed nervously, only to be embraced tightly by the short woman. He could hear his mom sobbing into his shoulder, and he slowly hugged her back. Mom, it finally happened. The doctor was wrong, Midoriya lied. But at that moment it felt like the truth. It felt like it was somewhere deep inside of him, waiting to be discovered, before he even met the League, something that had been destined to him if not by BR, then by fate. Sweetie, I'm so happy for you, Inko sobbed. Thank you, Mom, me too. Me too, Midoriya whispered back. Now, as strong as it was to contain his excitement every time 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀 snapped at him a rude remark, he knew it was for the better. Not only would it ruin 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀 when he found out he had gotten into the hero course of UA, he was ready to get exploded for the sake of seeing 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀's reaction when Midoriya will beat him with it. Now, all he had to do was wait. Now, all he had to do was train. And then all his suffering, all his pain, it will all pay off. 8 months later, Midoriya as Toga let out a small giggle, trying to catch her breath without him noticing. You know, it's finally getting exciting to play with you. Toga teased, and before Midoriya could answer, she leaped towards him, seeming to want to use her speed to pin him down. He knew it was a trick, but there wasn't any way that knowledge would help him with what came next. That's the reaction training. It almost seemed that Toga moved at random, and it kind of was. Every time they trained, she always moved different after this move. She had only repeated her movements a few times, and that was an accident, as she later on said, since you can't keep changing movements infinitely, and even she was bound to repeat at times. She spread her legs a little wider, before pushing herself with her left leg, then her right, bouncing professionally side to side. She landed next to the wall, and without losing momentum placed her foot that still hasn't landed on the wall. She jumped off the floor with the leg that was still on the ground, and using her momentum, pushed herself off the wall and did a backflip, trying to land right in front of Midoriya to cause him to try and dodge, which would be impossible at such close range. What she didn't know, though, was that he managed to read her movements. One thing he realized was that memory wasn't something he needed in an actual fight. He should be able to be read their opponent's movements. Their movements, technique, should be analyzed, and no matter how good a villain is, unless they got a completely opposite technique in case of an emergency, their attacks could easily be avoided and deflected, and they would be defeated without too much of a problem, especially if they were short-time fighters. Midoriya in the beginning of training would have let her get him. Months ago, he would have tried to dodge. But today, he grabbed her outstretched hands and yanked her downwards, at the same time angling his knee so that he would hit her in the stomach. She gasped and stumbled to the side, and Midoriya used to that to push her to the ground, before placing himself on top of her, pinning her as firmly as he learned in the past months. He counted. Just as he was about to count 2, which is the time limit to get out of the pin position, Toga grunted as she bended backwards, her back flexibly allowing her to bend at degrees, hitting Midoriya harshly on his jaw, causing Midoriya's grip to lessen, which let her throw her off him. And you did great. It was fun. But you forgot to pin my hands on my back. You pinned them to the ground instead. I told you not to do that, 𝗵𝗃. Toga clapped her hands and put her hands on her hips proudly, enjoying the scolding she was giving. Midoriya groaned and rubbed his jaw, feeling around his mouth for any BLD which he felt should have been there at how strong she hit him, despite not looking affected herself. You always seem to have a trick up your sleeve. It's annoying. Not everyone is as lucky to have your flexibility, damn it. He grunted, and yet he couldn't help but feel proud of himself at how far he had progressed, how much time has passed, how much stronger and faster he was. It was 𝗵, and today was the UA entrance exam, the physical test. He had been training every morning before school and after school, for hours to be able to study and get his work done, and it was sure to pay off during that exam. Well, if you would have used your quirk, I bet I would have been able to move at all. But it's my win anyways. She then came up to Izuku and him on the cheek before leaving. She always teased him like that, since he was too weak to resist or yell at her after training, and she knew how sensitive he was to girls doing such stuff. After he blushed so severely when she changed in front of him, he turned away a few seconds later, of course, but he caught sight of something he wasn't supposed to see yet nonetheless. They weren't a couple, and Midoriya wanted anything but that. After all, he didn't want to wake up in a hospital from BLD loss. Midoriya managed to stand up a few minutes later, and walked into the bar, since the only exit was through there. Midoriya, good luck at the exam. Kurogiri called out when Midoriya walked into the bar and was about to leave. Midoriya was about to thank him when another voice sounded, causing him to restrain from rolling his eyes. Hey, chosen one. Midoriya turned towards Shigaraki, a devious smirk on the older male's face as he spun a spoon in his morning coffee. Yeah. Don't mess up there, or I'll find a way to disintegrate your quirk first and then you. Shigaraki disintegrated his spoon, causing Kurogiri to huff disapprovingly as he reached for a napkin. Midoriya meanwhile stared at the blue-haired male for a few seconds, stumped at the ridiculous threat. I'll find a way, trust me? He hissed, pointing at Midoriya threateningly with his bony finger. Geez, guess that's the best good luck in getting from you. Midoriya grunted as he began walking towards the door. Break a DMN leg. Shigaraki called out as he closed the door behind him, and Midoriya couldn't help but realize that he meant it literally, despite hoping otherwise. Why am I not surprised? He mumbled to himself. With that he walked out of the building, smiling. He had gotten along with everyone, including Shigaraki, even if in their own unstable way. Nonetheless, Shigaraki and Midoriya dealt with each other pretty well. Though Midoriya couldn't deny that sometimes Shigaraki acted like a child, though, unlike 𝗳𝗵𝗄, he wouldn't say that aloud. He jogged home and did everything he usually did, except, instead of dressing up in his usual clothes, he wore a sports uniform that wasn't loose around him, so that if he wanted to make static electricity, his skin would still be able to somewhat absorb it. He has been analyzing his quirk a lot, and he could use it almost as good as an adult that has his quirk could. He had been training his quirk a lot as well. At first, it hurt him, from simple little shocks that you get from rubbing your socks against the carpet and touching something, to something as much as almost a defibrillator during large-scale attacks and absorption. Luckily, it was okay, and Midoriya's body got adjusted to such shocks of his attacks soon enough. He looked at himself in the mirror when he finally finished changing, and he couldn't help but feel shocked yet proud at what he saw. No one noticed that he got muscles, maybe his mom, but oh how Bakugo would be surprised to find his Deku on the entrance exam field. Midoriya couldn't wait to see the blonde's reaction. Ha! Midoriya immediately knew what was coming as soon as he heard someone yelling a loud "ha" from behind him. "Hey Kaken," he said, turning around. Bakugo's eye was twitching as he looked at his classmate. "What the hell are you doing here? Thought I made it clear for you to not even think about joining." He snarled. "I couldn't miss out on such opportunity. Especially now that I've got so many tricks up my sleeve." Midoriya smiled and started to walk as he spoke. "Hey, you 𝗧𝗵𝗃, stop looking down on me. Look at me when you're talking to me." Bakugo was really not only did Midoriya disobey him and came here, but he forced Bakugo to have to catch up to him. "I'm glad you made past the written test too, Kaken," Midoriya stated, surprisingly honest. "We can be proper rivals this way," he explained. "Oh shut up, there's no way in hell you're passing, especially into the hero course," Bakugo growled, but Midoriya just kept on smiling. Now, he just had to get into class A. And unlike before, he had a chance he wouldn't dare miss. All he had to do was go all out. It will all be worth it in the end, Midoriya knew for sure. Go beyond, right? Plus villain ultra. The instructions were stated quickly, and Midoriya managed to hold back his excited mumbling about how amazing it was that 𝗵𝗃 was the announcer. He had been training on that too. Whenever he started mumbling, he forced himself to stop and think about it instead of saying it. That didn't worsen his memory though. As Shigaraki had said, it was just a habit of an overthinking nerd. They made their way onto the fields. Too bad Bakugo got another field. He really wanted to demonstrate his quirk to him. Maybe it was for the better, though as unlikely as it may seem, Midoriya felt like his own excitement about sharing his quirk while it was in action and Bakugo would directly be watching him and would express his shock in front of others would only grow. Maybe he was a bit of a SDST. That word didn't sit right with him, but he couldn't help smiling at the thought of Bakugo wanting to kill him once he shows off his new power. Maybe he was a MSCST, not a SDST. He had no clue. Right, let's start. Go go go. There are now countdowns in real. Midoriya stopped listening and started to run towards the simulated city, feeling extremely pumped up. He ran next into an ally that he knew would have robots, since it was wide enough for the robots to pass safely, and ran through, letting his right hand with the glove on glide against the surface of the wall. He felt energy gather into his hand and smiled as he let it pass to his feet, increasing his speed. It wasn't even a minute before he found robots standing together in the back of the buildings. They all turned to him, and Midoriya ran, jumping from side to side as Toga had taught him. Luckily, the place wasn't too dusty, and his sneakers, which had special RBB bands that helped him push off the surface easier and to gather more electricity with each turn, immediately showed their usefulness as he began to dodge with ease despite jumping from walls to the floor to another wall again. He dodged the attacks easily and punched a robot right into its head, breaking the machine. He recognized it as Pointer and started to add the points together as he continued to take down the robots. He ran throughout the back allies, gliding his hand across the wall to gain more energy, enhancing his speed and strength. As he continued to count the points in his head again, trying his best to get them right. Points, Midoriya thought proudly. Never had he considered he'd manage to pull a score like that. He just hoped that he'd be able to pull off beating even more robots to get a score just below, or even better, above 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁. Despite the small possibility, quirk or no quirk, 𝗵𝗃𝗀 was still more experienced, and Midoriya knew better than to expect getting a score better than him so soon. I wonder how many points Kaken has. Midoriya couldn't help but wonder, even more anxious and excited at the thought of beating 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁. Midoriya suddenly stumbled to the side as the earth shake. He looked around, checking to see if any of the buildings were about to collapse on him. Luckily, that wasn't the case, but the earth continued to shake furiously, and Midoriya slammed himself against the wall for balance. He then saw a shadow cast over him, and he looked to see what the gigantic thing that had began to cover the rest of the area he could see in front of him was. He couldn't help but stare in disbelief at what was now towering above him. The zero-pointer was a huge robot. It might not look intimidating, but its dimensions were. Before he knew what he was doing, he activated his quirk and ran to the central part of the city where the robot was standing and examined him with even more shock as he realized that he was even larger than how he saw him when 100 or so meters away. "Isn't this a little too much? We might get crushed," one of the participants exclaimed, panicked. "I'm out of here," someone else yelled, and the students began to run away from the giant. Just as they started running, the robot swung its enormous fist at the students, and Midoriya bit his tongue nervously as he jumped back, trying to avoid the damage as much as possible. The dust cleared slowly, and the robot rose its fist back up and began to slowly make his way to where the students were running. The participants yelled and pushed, but Midoriya stayed put, astonished. "I can't believe it, it really is amazing," he thought, but a smile didn't come to his face despite the admiration he felt. After all, the robot was still coming towards his direction, and he felt like if he wouldn't move in half a minute or so, he would definitely be crushed to death. But as fate would have it, that's when he heard it. Coughing, almost blocked out by the sound of a working mechanism. It was coming from where the robot was. He studied the ground next to the robot thoroughly, and finally he saw it, or to be more specific, her. A girl was laying on the ground, coughing, her leg crushed by rubble from the broken house. Midoriya's eyes widened and he immediately began to panic. Damn it! Why didn't she run? Before he could think much about it though, the robot made a step closer towards him, and more importantly, the brunette. Midoriya's eyes widened as realization hit him like a brick. 2 more steps, and the girl might be crushed. Damn it! Midoriya yelled as he began running towards the girl and the robot, his blood pumping from fear and adrenaline as he ran towards them, dragging his hand on the floor in front of him, absorbing the energy made from the friction. The robot made another step towards them. The girl shrieked and tried to reach for the debris on her leg. Midoriya stopped himself, which he was able to do fast with the help of the 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃 equips, and lifted the boulders off the girl's legs. The girl hissed from pain and he took her as gently as he could. The action rushed nonetheless as the robot raised his leg again, the menacing sound of the creaking mechanism, and then a click, a sign that the foot was about to go down. "Hold on," he yelled, and the girl hugged Midoriya's neck tightly, feeling awful pain as Midoriya held her injured legs, and Midoriya quickly let go of the girl's back and glided his hand against the floor quickly. He heard more clicking of the mechanism as it prepares to settle its foot. He continued doing so. More seconds. Midoriya thought anxiously, and a second later he stood up, held the girl's back in case she released her grip, and jumped as far as he could. There was a crash behind them, and the force from which the robot stepped sent dust and a gust of wind towards them. Midoriya lost his balance in the air and spun, his face now facing the sky and his legs too high to be able to put down in time. He landed roughly on his back and felt the air get knocked out of his lungs. The dust slowly began to fade away, but he knew it wasn't for long. The girl was on the floor next to him coughing and shaking, and he stood slowly, trying to catch his breath as his back cracked. And Midoriya groaned through gritted teeth. He then looked at the robot, which, at maximum, was meters away from them, and it'd probably take it more steps to reach them and crush them. Midoriya took off one of his 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃 bands, and began to rub his foot and his hands against the floor, gathering as much energy as he could. Come on, come on. Midoriya growled at himself, rubbing faster and faster, feeling the energy coming back to him. Not enough. There was still not enough energy, or time for that matter, for him to be able to jump towards the supposedly weakest part of the robot, the head, and leave any energy for a punch at all. Damn it. Midoriya snapped again and ran up to the girl. He carefully but quickly picked her up and used the energy he had hoped to use up on the robot and ran further into the allies. He ran and ran, trying to get away as far as possible. All the energy he'd gathered from all of the test was gone. He used it to get his body moving after such an intense hit to the ground. Did you know when the time will run out? Midoriya asked, gasping for air as he ran. I think there's less than minutes left, the girl managed. But I should manage. Midoriya stated. To his surprise, his voice wasn't shaking, not at all as a matter of fact. All he heard was a slight hint of tired strain, and yet, no fear that he felt showed on the outside. He continued running, releasing the girl's back time to glide his hand against the wall, in case he did get hit. But before he could get enough energy, he got hit. He got punched from behind, the hit causing him to turn slightly in the air and crush into the wall with his side. He coughed, trying to get the air back into his lungs. He then looked around in panic. The girl. I dropped her again. Please no, please be alright. Midoriya realized, frantically as he searched around him. He then saw her, laying on her side in front of the robot. The machine swung its fist upwards and was ready to hit the girl, and Midoriya hissed in panic and pain as he started to rub his hands. Oh, damn it. He snapped at himself more than the robot. He didn't have enough energy. He couldn't move anything but his hand, and that was with the quick energy absorption. He felt like he was dying as he forced himself to stand up, ignoring the searing pain in all his limbs and the dizziness as he gasped for air, still looking at the brunette. He had to save the girl. If he didn't, she could be injured, probably even permanently with how defenselessly she was laying on the ground. Damn it. Jumping at the robot, he aimed towards the girl and quickly tried to get her in his grasp, and just as he wanted to jump away, he realized he couldn't. He didn't have energy. At all. And before he could make it out of the robot's range, the robot's hand snapped down, right at Midoriya and the girl. He's waking up. Izuku, can you hear me? Midoriya slowly tried to open his eyes. Mom, Midoriya whispered in a croaky voice. Yes, Izuku, it's me. Sweetie, it's okay, I'm so sorry. Midoriya sobbed. Ma'am, please step aside, let me check on him. An old woman's voice said. He felt something cold get out onto his forehead, and he shivered. It was put off him a few seconds later, and Midoriya managed to open his eyes. You're in the nurse's office, dear. I managed to take care of some of your damaged backbones, so you should be able to move around just fine by tomorrow. Do not move too suddenly. Midoriya looked at the short old woman that was talking to him. The woman smiled sweetly. I am Recovery Girl, UA's nurse. I have a healing quirk, so your recovery, as I mentioned, wouldn't take as long as it would have without my healing. Midoriya smiled at the woman. Thank you, he managed. He then looked at his mom and remembered. What happened to the girl? The girl I was carrying during the exam. Is she all right? Midoriya panicked. Calm down. She's perfectly fine thanks to you. Midoriya let out a sigh of relief as he relaxed a little. I already sent her home as a matter of fact. She wanted to stay to check up on you, but I told her to go home. I've healed her. Thanks to you being able to save her in time, she's able to walk without casts with ease. Though as she mentioned, it still hurts a little. Recovery Girl smiled at Midoriya sweetly again. She was about to say something again when he felt a firm grip on his shoulders and saw his mom looking at him, tears swelling her eyes. Izuku, I was so worried. Didn't I tell you to be careful? You scared me so much. She sobbed. Mom, I'm sorry. Midoriya bit his lip, feeling guilty. He didn't like seeing his mom sad, especially if he was the reason. I'll be more careful. I just need more practice, I promise. Inko tried to make an angry mother face, but she laughed just like she did the first time he almost got hurt when he discovered his quirk. She then hugged him by his neck to not injure his back. Good job, Izuku. I'm proud of you, sweetie. Midoriya smiled proudly. He had been waiting for this chance to be someone's hero for so long. A week has passed. A week. You can guess how much his nails were ruined from biting with worry throughout the days. He didn't dare meeting up with the league, and it seems they understood that and kept quiet. But today was the day everything would change, so he wasn't surprised to see Toga and 𝗬𝗲𝗍 standing in his room. The person he expected to see the least was 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏. 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏. You came too. Midoriya stuttered, sighed, glancing at the few posters. Of All Might he forgot to take down. And here I was thinking that 𝗬𝗲𝗍 wanted to take them down because of himself, so he knew 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 would be coming. Midoriya thought, glancing at 𝗬𝗲𝗍. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 rose his eyebrows and shook his head, and Midoriya could read his mind. Didn't I tell you to take those posters down? His look nearly said. It took one glance to read that, and Midoriya bit his lip and looked at 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏. To his dismay, he was staring right at the posters. So you are not only a fan but a pretty big fan of All Might, huh? Midoriya gulped down his scream. 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 didn't sound pleased. Well, 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 then let out a sudden laugh. Don't worry, kid, I'll give you time to change your mind about him. He knew that it wasn't exactly what 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 wanted to say, and he got the cue. I'm taking these posters off today before bed. He made a mental note to himself. So, have you gotten the letter yet? From Yue? 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 asked, walking a little further from the window and deeper into the room. No, not yet. It's supposed to come today though. Midoriya stated. He had tried getting more confident of his training, but 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 still made him shiver. I see, we'll wait here then. 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 walked up to the wall and studied one of the All Might posters on the wall. Toga glanced at 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 to see if he was looking, and then looked at Midoriya. She glided her thumb against her neck and stuck her tongue out. He didn't need the signaling to know that 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 felt more hatred than ever as he glared at the poster. Izuku! Inko called out hysterically. Izuku ran towards the door and opened it, running right into his mom. What happened? He asked, shocked at the suddenness that Inko has yelled with. The letter. It's here. Inko waved an envelope in front of Izuku's face, and Izuku stood there, panicked. This is it. He calmed his mom down and stepped back into his room, the league still standing in his room. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗧𝗏 had managed to jump out the window, Toga was under the bed, and 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 was simply behind the door. So open the envelope, Toga said, making her voice slightly low and raspy as she eagerly squatted in place. Midoriya took a deep breath and slowly ripped the envelope. Something then fell out of it, and a mechanism that appeared to be a projector turned on. Wow, Midoriya managed as the projector began to turn on. They then couldn't help but stare in disbelief as All Might, in a golden suit, appeared in the projector screen. I'm here. As a projection. All Might called out. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗧𝗏. Midoriya stared at the projector in disbelief. We told you about him teaching at UA, yet you're surprised to see him in the result projection. Lame. 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 horsed. He then glared at All Might as if wanting to disintegrate him, not even God knows how, but he was itching to do so. Before I say anything, I would like to congratulate you, Izuku Midoriya. You got second place consisting of points. Here I thought that with a result like this you would have already bragged to us already. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗏 said, surprised. Booty didn't get points. I only got, I think. Why did the number grow? Midoriya frowned at the projection. What is going on? You may be wondering why the points are higher than what you calculated, and I will explain. You would have gotten points if not for the rescue points that the judges also grade on during the exam. Your heroism of saving the girl that was injured under the boulders instead of stubbornness to get first place, which you could, seeing how you managed to almost reach the second place contestant based off of only your villain points, was something UA does not dare overlook. You received rescue points for your heroism and lack of selfishness. Congratulations. You passed with the highest score. The projection then turned off All Might that was standing with his thumb up approvingly at Midoriya. Demon kid, you're pretty cool. Here I thought you'd barely manage, but you seem to have actually been able to use the training in something more real than 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 was cut off by Midoriya sobbing. They looked at him, surprised, as Midoriya covered his face in his hands. Hey, why are you crying, you idiot? You passed, be proud. Toga messed Midoriya's hair up playfully. Midoriya laughed at that, calming down his sobbing. Toon just so happy, Midoriya managed, turning in his chair and smiling at them. I would have been too, if it wasn't All Might presenting your win, 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏 said, somehow still despite the good news. 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗧𝗏. Toga laughed. You're so stubborn. Forget about All Might, look at who we're dealing with. We'll be friends with one of the greatest heroes in the future. Too bad you're a corrupt. Toga put her face onto Izuku's shoulder. Midoriya tried his best to ignore her comment, but despite his best efforts, it seemed to play on repeat. Too bad you're a corrupt, too bad you're a corrupt, you're a corrupt. Izuku, do you have a tissue? Inko asked nervously. Yeah. And your handkerchief? What about your handkerchief? Your hanky. I have it. I'm going to be late. Midoriya snapped, knowing it was the nicest way he could talk to his mother in her current state. I have to hurry. He grabbed his backpack and opened the door, preparing to leave. Izuku. What is it? Midoriya asked, more stressed than annoyed. He then saw the look in his mother's eyes and gulped nervously, feeling sorry for being so snappy all of a sudden. You're really cool, she said tenderly. Midoriya stared at her in shock, but then smiled back and laughed a nervous laugh. I'm off, he stated, smiling genuinely. He then rushed out of his apartment and towards his new school, Class A class, Midoriya mumbled to himself. He didn't do so unconsciously, even though he was worried, but he was actually hoping someone would hear him and tell him where to go. He rubbed his feet against the floor and used a little of his energy to run faster. There it is, he said excitedly. Before he could think anything else, he opened the huge door in front of him and looked into the classroom, pumped to see his new classmates and start his new life in his hero 𝗧𝗍𝗃. Don't put your feet on the desk. A boy with perfectly cut dark blue hair and glasses chopped his hand through the air in a robotic motion. Bakugo rose an eyebrow dramatically, not moving his feet off his desk. Don't you think that's rude to the UA upperclassmen and the people who made the desk? He asked, pointing his hand towards the desk that had Bakugo's gray sneakers on. Nope. What junior high did you go to? Bakugo dismisses, keeping his legs on the table. I can't believe this, how could this happen? Out of all people, why Kaken? I know we are supposed to be rivals now and so on, but I wasn't ready to actually be his classmate. Midoriya bit his cheek and slowly made his way into the room. The only free chairs were at the opposite side of the room from where Bakugo was sitting, and one behind Bakugo. Midoriya was about to walk towards the desk further away from Bakugo, but it appeared to be too late to try to hide. What the hell are you doing here? Midoriya turned towards Bakugo, biting harshly into his cheeks. Hey Kaken, he managed to say without stuttering. He then noticed that all the class was now staring at him, and he felt himself start to heat up. Good morning, a mechanical voice sounded. He looked towards Bakugo and saw that the boy that was talking to him was addressing him. I am from semi-private academy. My name is 𝗳𝗏𝗃, Midoriya stated before the boy managed to walk up to him with his freaky robotic movements. The boy stopped and looked at Midoriya. I'm Midoriya. Nice to meet you. Midoriya laughed nervously. The blue-haired male cleared his throat almost nervously before speaking. Nice to meet you, Midoriya. I am 𝗳𝗏𝗃. I have come to clarify something. Midoriya smiled as much as he could as he nodded, signaling the male to continue. You realize there was something more to that practical exam, didn't you? Midoriya stared at him in confusion. What do you mean? The rescue points. You guessed that there will be something like that, didn't you? Well, actually oh, that curly hair. You're the plain-looking one. He heard a female voice behind him. Midoriya turned around and looked at the girl behind him. It's you. You're all right. I'm very glad. Midoriya smiled at the girl behind him. Yeah, thanks to you, my leg healed in no time. It would have been much worse if pardon me, but you're the girl that got crushes under the boulders, right? Midoriya and the girl turned around towards 𝗳𝗏𝗃. Yes, the girl answered, seeming embarrassed. I'm very sorry I wasn't able to help. I have a quirk that helps me run fast, yet my first intention was to run off as fast as I could away from the danger instead of towards the people that needed saving. Midoriya looked somewhat guiltily at 𝗳𝗏𝗃. He seemed truly sincere, and it made Midoriya feel sorry for him as well. Oh no, it's fine. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised that you came back for me. It must have been terrifying. If you're here to make friends, you can leave. The class went silent and Midoriya and the girl turned around to see from whom the voice came from. That's when they saw a yellow cocoon, and a man that looked like he hadn't blinked in tears laying on the floor. "What is this?" The girls squealed from fear. "I'm your teacher, Mr. Izuku. Now, you're gonna get to your seats before I mark you tardy and expel you." The group hurried towards their seats. The girl got the seat next to the door though, so the only seat left was next to the window, next to 𝗵𝗃𝗲. Just great, he thought as he put on an interested face and looked at the teacher. He's learned not to show fear. Confidence makes others and aggressive, and that aggression leads to clumsiness. He wasn't planning to make this teacher angry though, he just didn't want to get expelled. "Anyways, put on your PE uniforms, we're going out." Mr. Izuku clicked a remote control and lockers came out of the wall. The students hurried towards them and took the ones with their number of table on them. They changed in the locker rooms, Izuku led them, and went out into the field. "We'll be doing a quirk apprehension test. One that gets the least score will be expelled. It's as easy as that." The whole class gasped and let Pot confused Hus. He then went on with the lecture about them now having any time to do any greeting classes if they wanted to achieve true results in the nearest future. Midoriya ignored that and looked around. He saw only two people from the physical exam, the guy with the strange laser stomach and Ida. Talk about Ida would have laughed so strong at him. Midoriya snorted to himself quietly. Luckily no one noticed. He then noticed that 𝗵𝗃𝗲 walked up in front of the group. He was handed a ball, and the next thing he knew, 𝗳𝗍𝗪. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 yelled as he threw the ball with his full force and quirk. Izuku was holding a device, and the whole class soon saw it. "Meters?" The whole class called out in disbelief. Even Midoriya was surprised. He thought he'd just explode the ball before it even got into the air. But then he smiled. "This is gonna be fun." 𝗵𝗃𝗲 ignored everyone's results. That was until one of the competition games, the meter dash. Smart Manufacturing sponsored by Mitsubishi Electric read more Midoriya was paired with 𝗵𝗃𝗲, which was something he both feared and anticipated. He was going to use his quirk, and 𝗵𝗃𝗲 would finally see the power he now has. He'll be mad, sure, might explode him, sure, but then he'd see him as a proper enemy. "Ready?" Midoriya got down to a runner's position and rubbed his hands against the grass. Not much friction, but he'd had some beforehand, so he'd make it. "Start." Midoriya and 𝗵𝗃𝗲 took off. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 dusting the path with his explosions. "Seconds." The machine called out. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 continues to set off his explosions as he opened his eyes wide in disbelief. "Must be a glitch," he muttered. "Seconds." 𝗵𝗃𝗲 made it to the finish line and looked behind him. Midoriya wasn't there. "Kaken, do you like my quirk?" Midoriya asked excitedly. Midoriya wasn't an idiot to know that 𝗵𝗃𝗲 wouldn't be looking at him during the dash, so he used his leftover energy to form sparks on his hands. "It can be used similarly to you if I want. It's an energy stockpiling quirk, but I can take it from friction. Neat, don't you think?" 𝗵𝗃𝗲 kept on staring at Midoriya. He didn't have hatred in his eyes, only pure confusion. I got a quirk a couple months ago. Didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise once we both got into UA." Midoriya smiled at him and crossed his hands on his knee. "I've got a chance against you no. Strange, isn't it?" He commented with hope in his voice. That's when 𝗵𝗃𝗲 snapped. 𝗳𝗍𝗪𝗧𝗔. He formed explosions from his hands and started to run towards Midoriya. Midoriya dragged his foot around him on the ground, gaining just enough friction for him to jump away. Luckily, he didn't need to. "I don't allow violence against one another when it isn't used for training." Mr. Izuku spoke calmly but threateningly. Midoriya shivered as he remembered Shigaraki's voice being sort of similar. The rest of the training was tense. The other students saw the fight. "That guy's pretty aggressive." Midoriya's classmate, 𝗧𝗍𝗪, noted, pouring at 𝗵𝗃𝗲. "Poor people, that was him." Stopped before the actually fun began. Midoriya thought as he looked at his new classmates. They all have a lot to learn about each other, even if Midoriya had to keep a few secrets to himself. Class ended. The first day of school was over. There was English, the quirk apprehension test, and a few other classes. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 glared at him throughout almost all his classes. It was worrying, quirk or not, Midoriya still feared 𝗵𝗃𝗲. His violence was something to be cautious of. Midoriya walked to the bus station, excited to tell the league what happened. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder. "What's the meaning of this, Deku? 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 growled. Midoriya took a deep breath. What do you mean? You would have showed me your quirk as soon as you first got it. It's not like you to keep a secret like that for a whole couple of months. You were looking down on me, weren't you? Waiting for the moment I'd lose sight of you before humiliating me. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 tightened his grip on Midoriya's shoulder. Midoriya didn't flinch. Violence being answered by calmness was something that's PSS 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁, and that would be his advantage. Hopefully. I wanted this to be a surprise. I told you it's not like you. Then what do you want to know? Why didn't you tell me earlier? You were trying to embarrass me, weren't you? But you could have done that in middle school. You wanted to embarrass me in a prestigious place, make me look like an idiot in front of heroes, huh? How you reacted was up to you. I just found UA the best place to demonstrate my abilities to you and my classmates. Midoriya stated as he looked away from 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁. They both went quiet. Midoriya didn't turn around when he spoke. He kept staring at the road. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 put his hand off of Midoriya's shoulder. This isn't over, Deku. He snapped harshly and stomped away. Midoriya waited a little before letting out a sigh of relief, wiping his forehead. Midoriya turned around and saw the spiky red hair boy form his class. Midoriya answered back. What does he want? Sorry I didn't step up for you just now. I was curious what you two had to do with each other. Sorry. Midoriya bit his cheek. He didn't want them to know he was quirkless before. Despite him having a quirk now, he still didn't want them to know about his foolish past. So what do you think? He murmured to the red hair. I didn't hear a thing, honestly. I tried walking closer, but couldn't make it close without being noticed of eavesdropping. The red hair laughed nervously, embarrassed. Oh, you could have just pretended to be waiting for the bus, you know. He probably doesn't even remember you're from the same class as him. That's kinda rude, the red hair noted. Yeah, I know. That's what Kaken is always like, Midoriya shrugged. Sorry. I'm Kirishima, by the way. 𝗔𝗂𝗪 Kirishima. Kirishima smiled with his shark teeth at Midoriya. Nice to meet you, Kirishima. And you're Deku? Midoriya opened his eyes wide in disbelief. Did he not know the meaning of Deku? What kind of hating parents would call their child useless right after they're born? So that is a nickname. Sorry, man, I just wanted to check. Kirishima said, laughing nervously. Yeah, ever since Kaken learned how to read, he'd been calling me that. It's just that my name can be read as Deku. Oh, sounds a lot like Deku. You know, I can do it. Kirishima complimented as he grinned at Midoriya. Midoriya let a small smile crawl onto his lips as he looked at the bright red head. Right, thanks. Midoriya thanked as he smiled softly. Guess it's not going to be as bad with Kaken if people like this are with me. Sue, how was it? Toga tried to keep her excitement to herself, but it obviously wasn't working because she was near crushing his shoulders. I'll tell you as soon as you let me go, Toga. Midoriya smiled awkwardly. He felt his shoulders get released and sighed. Spill it. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 smiled at Midoriya. Midoriya smiled back. It was a pain for 𝗬𝗍𝗄 to smile too much because of his scars, and for Midoriya to be an exception was amazing. Well, the people there are nice. Except Kaken, he's in my class. Midoriya immediately saw Toga and 𝗬𝗍𝗄 roll their eyes at that, and Shigaraki glanced at them, seeming to realize quickly what it could mean. Well then, Tiger, show him what you're made of. A weak person turning strong should be a kick in the knees for him. Shigaraki shrugged and smiled at Midoriya. Wasn't a sweet smile, but the best Midoriya could get. Yeah, I already beat him at the meter dash race. I mean, I probably beat him in other tests too, but we raced together on that one. The test. Isn't it the first day? You're supposed to be having some sort of a welcome party or something, aren't you? Toga wondered. Well, got lucky with the teachers. About him. Midoriya took his hero analysis for the future notebook, and despite having everything memorized, he reread it from the notebook. Erase your hero, erase your head. He can cancel our quirks with just one glance. When he blinks, the effect is off, and the person can use his quirk again. He can always look back at them again in some small range of time, but the less he blinks, the more he will need to blink later, so he's a short-time fighter. Fights at night, obviously hates attention. He also has a binding cloth on his neck. It's made out of flexible material, but it's strong, and can hold back even someone like Kakin when used correctly. I've actually seen him use it. Midoriya closed his notebook. Mr. Izuku for me though. He added. He's bad news. Good thing he's a short-time fighter though. In case we face him he shouldn't be a problem. Shigaraki smirked at that thought and placed his chin on his hand as his eyes looked away, drifting off into whatever devious fantasy he was having. It took Midoriya too long to understand what he meant, and he couldn't help but feel a shiver run down his spine, quickly shaking it off as he tried to calm down. School went on and on. The sports festival was a total win, first place for Midoriya. Poor Bakugo would have refused to take ST place anyway because Todoroki was against using his fire quirk. He used it against Midoriya in the match before, but Bakugo didn't get to see that side of him. Midoriya informed all the news to the league, but they didn't seem to make any step towards their goal. Shigaraki. Midoriya came up to Shigaraki, who was sitting on his regular bar stool. Shigaraki asked, uninterested as always. The summer campy have to go there so I won't be able to keep watch on All Might. Is that alright? Shigaraki looked at Midoriya. That's not that good of news. But I guess that's gotta happen. Midoriya smiled at him and was about to walk away when he felt his clothes get pinched. He turned around and saw Shigaraki being the one holding him. Miss. Midoriya managed. Shigaraki continued holding him, staring at him through his hand. Never mind. Shigaraki let go of Midoriya and Midoriya quickly made his way back to Twice, who was the new member of the League of Villains after the fight with Stain. He couldn't stop thinking about what happened though, and he could only hope he hadn't done anything to piss the male off. What did he want from me? He's never hesitated to say anything to anyone before, so what was that about? Did he think of the wrong person? What isn't going on in his head? Midoriya didn't even notice he started mumbling. That's how nervous he was. Hey Midoriya, you're mumbling. Todoroki noted as they made their way to the cafeteria. Thought I've gotten rid of that habit by now, sorry. You used to mumble? Ida asked, surprised and somewhat suspicious. I know right. So strange. You look so not the mumbling type guy. That habit almost makes you nerdy though. Uraraka teased. Midoriya smiled back weakly and they continued walking. She really guessed it with such ease, Midoriya thought to himself. Can't believe I let something like that slip. They didn't hear me say Shigaraki, didn't they? Hey, you seem out of it. Uraraka noted. Something wrong? Oh no, not really. Just thinking about what I can improve for my quirk. I've been wanting to fix my mom's microwave for almost a week now, so maybe I can use it for that. Midoriya didn't even know how he thought of a lie like that so fast, and neither did he know if it made sense, but he hoped it did. Well, that's sweet, but I don't think you should worry about it that much. Ask Kaminari. Uraraka winked. Midoriya laughed. Kaminari was probably going to go brain dead, and that was something that never gets boring to watch. Did fixing something with electricity really make sense, though? And if not, did that mean she just wanted to cheer Midoriya up? It's nice to have friends like them. Midoriya smiled at the thought. And just for a moment, a small, unrecognizable one, he couldn't help but wonder if he would have ever been able to meet them in another, happier, life. It was hell. Even with a quirk like Midoriya's, making it through the forest of monsters was not an easy task. It took hours. Who would have thought that it would be such torture before the summer camp even began? Should talking about Midoriya getting hit in the ball by a little boy even count as an event after that? Then they were fed, sure, but the thought of having to cook themselves the next day was terrifying. Having training and cooking lessons was going to be a pain. The next day was when the real torture began though. Don't go rubbing your hands there, kitten. Down again you go. Midoriya gasped for air as he went for another push-up. No, one of the Class B students whined as they limped away. Yes, more. We're not done yet. Pixie Bob called out and grabbed the student, dragging him back to their training zone. A large explosion almost made both the classes deaf, but the huge explosion in the sky followed by a die was the last of their worries. It was torture. Can't. Midoriya managed and let himself get crushed by Tiger. Well, you did better than I expected on that one. Now get as much electricity in your body as you can afford and use it all at once. Go over there not to hurt anyone. Tiger pointed to a zone that was empty, and Midoriya rubbed his finger against the ground, trying to get energy to stand. Who knew that school training could be worse than villain training? It's time for the test of courage, Mina said excitedly as she jumped up and down. We're gonna test it? A few other Class A students called out happily. Before that, it pains me to say this, Izuku started monotonously, but the extra lessons group will be having class with me for now. That statement was followed by whines and yells of disapproval from the Class A extra lesson students. The next thing Midoriya knew, they were drawing lots from one of the pussycats with numbers from Midoriya drew #GettingOjiro. Boy, good to have you as company. Ojiro saw the stunner Midoriya was holding and waved his paper as well. Midoriya stated, smiling truthfully at Ojiro. At least I'm not with Kaken, alright, group number, go. Finally, it was Midoriya and Ojiro's turn. They both walked in, more excited than nervous as they heard scary cries and noises. They made their way deeper into the forest. Let me take your soul, a voice hissed from an unknown direction. Midoriya couldn't handle it and laughed. I'm sorry. I don't know why, but I just can't take this seriously. Midoriya laughed until he was folded in and was near crying. Ojiro laughed with him, mostly because he was infected by his laughter. Midoriya and Ojiro kept on laughing, but then Ojiro coughed and sniffed the air. What is this? He muttered. Midoriya slowly calmed down and looked around. He frowned at the air around him. It had purple clouds. A whole blanket of a purple cloud as a matter of fact. Midoriya waves his hand in front of him, trying to get the cloud to move away to be able to breathe properly. It wouldn't disappear. Midoriya, I don't think this is. Ojiro looked around, nervous, and then slowly started to shake in place. Midoriya suddenly clapped a hand over his nose and mouth and turned to Ojiro as he spoke. Ojiro, don't breath in, I think. He then looked at Ojiro as his body went limp and he fell to the ground. No. Midoriya kneeled down and picked up Ojiro's body, holding his breath. He looked around, but he couldn't see the end of this cloud. He wasn't going to be able to make it out on a single breath. Need help? Midoriya spun around as he heard a familiar voice. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃 was standing there, an oxygen mask in his outstretched hand. Midoriya stared at him in disbelief, then frowned. I know, please just take it. You've got a classmate that's making similar ones, so you won't look suspicious. I don't have one for that guy, so think of something before you go. Midoriya grit his teeth. He was running out of breath. It was either his pride or possibly Ojiro and his life. He put down Ojiro's teeth and grabbed the mask from 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃. He sat down, putting Ojiro down and put on his mask. Good. Thanks, I was worried. I'm off now. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃 then walked away casually, as if nothing happened. Midoriya stared at him with disbelief, but then picked up Ojiro and started running towards where he came from. Could they have released 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃? If so, were his classmates dead? Were they unconscious? Hopefully they were alive. He continued to run, breathing in his oxygen mask. He put the mask onto Ojiro a few times. He breathed, but Midoriya ran out of breath fast because he was running, and he had to be conscious to get him to safety, so there was no other choice. He made it back from the forest and stood still as he watched what was happening. Ragdoll had her head crushed under the foot of 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗃, and Spinner had his millions of weapons out to fight. The pussycats threw themselves at the villains, and a fight arose. He wanted to help, but he needed to help Ojiro first. Midoriya ran through the battlefield. Get out of here, kid. 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗃 threw at him. On it. Be safe, I'll tell the teachers. Midoriya yelled back. He then ran to the house, feeling strangely more scared than he was supposed to.